From the top rope, and the Great American Bash, I bid you all good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in this great land of ours or around the world. Welcome to the $55 million studio. I'm the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's get into this issue. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. April 19, 1999 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Davey Boy Smith hospitalized with spinal infection. WCW Spring Stampede Review, more. By Observer staff. The health situations involving both Davey Boy Smith and Japanese woman wrestler Miko Kato took turns for the worse this past week. Kato, 23, passed away at 9:35 a.m. on April 9 at Fukuoka Hospital after never regaining consciousness after a brain injury suffered in the ring on March 31 during a tag team match in Fukuoka, which led to her undergoing brain surgery the next day. Her funeral on April 12 in her home city of Osaka was attended by virtually every woman wrestler from Erjin, All Japan Women, GIA, JWP and LLPW. A memorial wrestling show was scheduled for her on April 14 at Korakuen Hall. Kato had wrestled professionally only 6 weeks before suffering her fatal injury inside the ring in only her 15th pro match. Kato held a keylock on Mariko Yoshida in a tag match with her teaming with Michiko Mukai against Yoshida, the Queen of Erjin, and Mikiko Futagami. In a strange irony, in a high spot first made famous in Japan by Karl Gotch and later popularized even more by Bob Backlund and Davey Boy Smith, she was lifted up from the hold and dropped into a back suplex and laid there unconscious, taking the bump wrong, and was pinned. Kato, 5'3" and 144 pounds, was born January 28, 1976 and grew up in Osaka. She had just graduated Osaka Arts Photography College in March of 1998 before trying out for the Erjin promotion in June and passing the test. She began training in September and had her first pro match on February 16. Kato is one of only 11 wrestlers worldwide over the past 20 years that died either in the ring or in some form from either a heart attack or injury suffered in a match, which is actually a low stat considering how much pro wrestling there is in the world. Boxing, far fewer matches although far more active participants on a major league basis, averages 3 to 4 deaths per year stemming from in-ring injuries. It was the second death stemming from an in-ring brain injury in less than 2 years in Japan, the only 2 deaths of that kind in the history of Japanese wrestling. There hasn't been such a death in American rings since Ron Dupree in 1975. There has been criticism in Japan stemming from this death on smaller promotions using people without athletic backgrounds and rushing wrestlers into the ring professionally without adequate training since Kato died so quickly into her career. But that may not be germane, since there have been 2 deaths in recent years in Japan of wrestlers that were in training, one in the old UWF dojo and another in the New Japan dojo, both of whom had strong sports backgrounds and one of whom was a national amateur wrestling champion. Because Erjin has so few wrestlers, Kato often wrestled twice on the same shows, and also helped set up and take down the ring, and in the Japanese hierarchical system, had to work as well doing errands for the veterans, so it was exhausting work on her first tour. Deaths related to in-ring heart attack or injury over the past 20 years. July 31, 1979, Bull Martin, 34, heart attack after a match in St. John's, Newfoundland. December 25, 1979, Sangre India, 23, broken neck after a missed tope at Arena, Mexico. June 3, 1985, Tarzan Govender, no causes known, in South Africa. April 6, 1986, El Solitario, 41, considered by many as the second biggest star in the history of Mexican wrestling behind only El Santo, from a heart attack after a match. August 24, 1987, Killer Mal Kirk, 51, heart attack at the finish of a match against Big Daddy in England. October 1992, Kevin Corley, 46, heart attack during a battle royal in Lewisham, England. August 1, 1993, Jimmy Beale, mid-20s, died in dressing room of a match in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. October 26, 1993, Oro, 21, brain aneurysm during a match at Arena, Mexico. December 13, 1993, Larry Cameron, 41, heart attack during a match with Tony St. Clair in Bremen, England, believed to be steroid-related. August 16, 1997, Plum Marco, 29, brain aneurysm during a match in Japan. Smith, 36, remains in the intensive care unit at Rocky View Hospital in Calgary with a still as yet undiagnosed spinal infection that at this point is considered almost certainly career-ending and even potentially life-threatening. He was scheduled to undergo a second spinal tap this week, to drain the fluid from the spine, both to keep the infection from going to the brain, and also to attempt to get a diagnosis on what exactly the infection is that is both very painful and not responding to treatment. Smith was also diagnosed as having a crushed C9 and C10 disc in his back vertebrae, and has 4 fractured discs, which at this point looks to necessitate career-ending back surgery to place titanium in his back, and the infection has also resulted in his veins collapsing, so he is at press time having to be fed with an IV. Smith was given the word on April 11 that there is a chance he will have to live the rest of his life in a wheelchair, bringing to mind the potential sad irony of the possibility that both members of the British Bulldogs, the other being Dynamite Kid Billington, one of the greatest in-ring performers in history, and as a unit, the most innovative tag team ever, living the rest of their lives in wheelchairs before the age of 40. In probably the single most classless move in company history, Diane Myers of WCW Legal fed Smith his termination notice effective immediately on April 5, which arrived at his father-in-law's home the next day and was brought to him in ICU. WCW used the 90-day injury clause. If a wrestler is unable to perform for 90 days, the company has the right to rescind the contract, to terminate his contract, which had approximately 2 years remaining. There had been a lot of internet and other rumors that Smith, who has been out of action since suffering a back injury taking a power slam on the trapdoor for the Warrior gimmick in the September Nitro match against Alex Wright, had been let go by WCW, or the provisions of his contract had changed, or even that he was WWF bound, none of which were true. At one point there had been talk of flying him into Toronto for the March 29th Nitro and putting him on television for an interview just to let everyone know he was still under contract and simply hadn't been appearing due to his back injury. As it turned out, WCW never sent Smith tickets to Toronto, and as it turned out it was just as well, because the undetermined infection turned out to hospitalize him 2 days later. A Calgary Sun article this past week talked of Smith potentially suing WCW over the termination, since the injury occurred due to the unsafe working environment of the ring with the trapdoor, and several wrestlers suffered injuries during that time period due to taking bumps on the door. While Smith signed a contract believed to be in the mid-6 figures after himself paying $150,000 to Titan Sports to get out of his existing WWF contract in the wake of the Bret Hart double-cross because he was so vociferous in complaining about his brother-in-law's treatment, he was almost crippled by a series of knee injuries in his final year with Titan Sports as a result of 20 years of pro wrestling, and never had a good match in WCW. While his termination was inevitable, being that his career is most likely finished, nothing could be more classless than the manner and timing of how it was handled by WCW. This even tops when the company fired Ricky Steamboat, one of the hardest working and best in-ring performers of all time, and who was noted as one of the few veterans who went out of the way to help the younger wrestlers improve, after he suffered a career-ending back injury in a match with Steve Austin. WCW wasn't only classless to Steamboat in that regard, but also to fans, as they attempted to keep the injury quiet so as not to let fans know a rematch with Austin on the upcoming pay-per-view show wasn't going to take place, as was advertised, even after they knew it was likely his career was over. This all took place only a few months before his contract was set to expire in the first place, but instead, when the company received word he wasn't going to be able to return to action, he was terminated immediately and the two sides wound up in court. Smith, who grew up in Manchester, England, and in the 90s became better known as the British Bulldog, had a largely successful career, beginning wrestling for Max and Shirley Crabtree's joint promotions in England in the spring of 1978 as a 15-year-old. He soon became a phenom in that country, working on televised matches as a tag team partner of the country's biggest star, Big Daddy. As was typical in those days, the top British stars would eventually get a chance to tour for Stu Hart's Stampede wrestling promotion. Smith, like Dynamite Kid and Billy Robinson before him, came to Calgary from England in 1981 before coming to Japan and the United States to become the 3 biggest modern stars ever to come from that country. By the time he arrived in Canada, his cousin was already considered the top performer in the company and considered by many as pound for pound the best performer in the world. The Calgary promotion, with its ties to New Japan Wrestling, with Dynamite Kid, Bret Hart and Smith, who arrived in Canada at the age of 18 weighing less than 200 pounds, revolutionized lighter weight wrestling some 15 years before WCW coined the phrase cruiserweights. Smith made a sensational debut in Japan in late 1983 as the Masked Vampire, going against the Cobra, George Takano, and unmasked in the ring that night. For the rest of the decade, he and Dynamite Kid were considered one of the top tag teams in the world, working for New Japan, later All Japan, WWF, as well as Stampede Wrestling. After establishing himself as one of the top stars in Canada, Smith, in late 1984, married Diana Hart of the famous Calgary wrestling family. About the same time, Vince McMahon purchased Stampede Wrestling from Stu Hart, and as part of the deal, Hart's 3 top stars, Bret, Dynamite, and Davey, went to work for the WWF as prelim wrestlers without a push. Dynamite and Davey didn't last long in a non-pushed undercard role as they were already established superstars in Japan and became regulars for All Japan Pro Wrestling after quitting WWF for the first time. They were brought back to the WWF several months later, literally days before they were about to get a major offer from Bill Watts Mid-South Wrestling to feud with the Rock and Roll Express, coined the British Bulldogs, and given a minor push which eventually became major and wound up with them being the tag team in the company. But that was short-lived, as Dynamite's back went out in late 1986 with an injury that should have been career-ending. Months before he was recovered, in a sickening scene, Dynamite was literally carried to the ring to drop the straps to Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart on a television match before taking several months more off. Dynamite eventually returned and was still a good performer, but he and the team was never the same after the back injury, which grew worse over the years and resulted in his current state of being confined to a wheelchair. Eventually the Bulldogs quit WWF to return as regulars for All Japan, and to try and save as bookers, Hart's attempted revival of Stampede Wrestling, which was on its last legs. The Bulldogs were also known outside the ring within wrestling for as much as their in-ring talents. Kid has admitted his own huge drug consumption bills while at his financial peak with the WWF steroids and otherwise, and both were known for their constant ribbing. After a less than amicable split after doing an angle in Calgary to break up the tag team in the dying days of that territory, the two cousins wound up hating each other in real life as well and haven't spoken in many years. After the demise of Kid's career due to injuries, Smith became a singles wrestler called the British Bulldog, and gained major fame as the top drawing card in the United Kingdom, much to Kid's chagrin, at a time when American wrestling had hit the skids due to the drug scandal, but the WWF was on fire doing European tours. At the peak of his popularity, he was fired by the WWF, allegedly because Vince McMahon was attempting to clean up his company due to all the negative publicity regarding steroids and, according to information in a lawsuit later filed by Jim Hellwig Smith, whose 175 pounds that he weighed when he arrived in Calgary probably peaked at a nearly Scott Steiner-like 275 pounds on a 5'10" frame. In recent years his weight was closer to 245 pounds to make things easier on his knees, at his most monstrous, and Hellwig were fired because McMahon believed they were somehow involved with HGH usage for the boys to beat steroid tests, a claim Hellwig and Smith both denied was true, but both admitted being told of the accusation as a reason for their dismissal. Smith spent a few years in WCW before leaving over a contract dispute and going to England to wrestle full-time on the local level. He eventually returned to the WWF with the plan of building European shows around him as the European heavyweight champion. While Smith was one of the physically most talented performers ever in the profession, combining uncanny agility with almost freakish power combined with his strong wrestling background, he was terribly inconsistent in the ring. On certain nights he could be as good a performer as there was in the business, such as big junior heavyweight matches early on in Japan and the US. Without question his most famous match was the night he was plagued with a staph infection in his knee, and at one of the all-time legendary matches with Bret Hart at Wembley Stadium on August 29, 1992 before more than 75,000 fans to win the Intercontinental title. It was ironic that at the peak of his popularity, he was gone from the company only a few months later after dropping the title to Shawn Michaels and quickly being fired. Not far behind as far as match quality, although it didn't garner the same notoriety, was his December 17, 1995 classic challenging Hart for the WWF title in Hershey, Pennsylvania, at an in-your-house pay-per-view, which was easily the best WWF match of that year, along with his February 26, 1997 European title tournament final against Owen Hart. He also had great matches against Vader for the WCW heavyweight title at both a Slamboree and a Clash of the Champions in 1993. But those great matches, particularly in later years, were almost frustrating to management because when he wasn't motivated, his matches were at the other end of the spectrum. Probably his last memorable match would have been in Birmingham, England on September 20, 1997, when, already plagued by a very bad knee, he lost the European title to Shawn Michaels in a great match after literally being told of the result at the last minute, and after Michaels had turned down the original finish of Bulldog going over clean in his own country, with the idea that it would be building to a major rematch. He would win over Michaels a few months later in his hometown of Manchester, which turned out to be even more historically significant since it never took place. He worked some with a chronic bad knee which worsened, and injured his knee again backstage after the infamous Survivor Series match in Montreal in breaking up the Vince McMahon-Bret Hart fight. Although McMahon proclaimed the new Hart Foundation without Bret would give Owen and Bulldog a chance to become the stars, Bret's long shadow was holding them back from becoming. Smith, infuriated as to how everything went down, never wrestled another match for the WWF, and left in a very bitter split-up, although one that he may have later regretted because of all the problems within WCW and his inability to get off the ground with the company. Davey Boy Smith. Career title history. Source, Wrestling Title History's 3rd edition. World Wrestling Federation Intercontinental Heavyweight defeated Bret Hart August 29, 1992 London, England. Lost to Shawn Michaels October 27, 1992 Terre Haute, in. World Wrestling Federation Tag Team, with Dynamite Kid defeated Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake April 7, 1986 Chicago. Lost to Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart January 26, 1987 Tampa, Florida, with Owen Hart defeated Bart and Billy Gunn September 22, 1996 Philadelphia. Lost to Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels May 25, 1997 Evansville, Indiana. World Wrestling Federation European Heavyweight defeated Owen Hart in tournament final February 26, 1997 Berlin, Germany. Lost to Shawn Michaels September 20, 1997 Birmingham, England. Stampede North American Heavyweight defeated Bad News Allen June 18, 1984 Vancouver, BC. Promotion folded August 1984 when sold to Vince McMahon. Company reopened October 1985 with Smith recognized as champion. Lost to Kerry Brown December 21, 1985 Calgary. Stampede International Tag Team, with Bruce Hart defeated Duke Myers and Kerry Brown 1982, lost to Duke Myers and Dynamite Kid August 1982, with Bruce Hart defeated Cuban Assassin and Francisco Flores December 1983, lost to Danny Davis and Hubert Gallant February 27, 1984 Vancouver, BC, with Dynamite Kid defeated Bad News Allen and Cuban Assassin for vacant titles March 31, 1984 Calgary, titles vacant when promotion closed August 1984, with Dynamite Kid defeated Jerry Morrow and Cuban Assassin December 7, 1988 Calgary, lost to Mohan Singh, Mike Shaw, Bokan Singh, Gary Albright, December 30, 1988 Calgary. Stampede British Commonwealth Mid-Heavyweight defeated Dynamite Kid 1982, lost to Bruce Hart August 1982. Wrestling Observer Awards 1985 Tag Team of the Year with Dynamite Kid. Paced by a surprising walk-up which we're told was largely late curiosity overseeing Masahiro Chono competing in an explosive barbed wire match, a match which turned out to be a huge disappointment. The April 10 Tokyo Dome show ended up drawing the 9th largest crowd in the history of Japanese wrestling. Chono had done a lot of good PR work in the weeks leading to his match with Atsushi Onita, going to the United States and claiming that NASA had designed a ring costume to wear, because NASA astronauts are worried about explosive barbed wire, and they sent guys out in space, that he would be coming to the ring in a tank. And probably most important, that he claimed he would not allow this match to air on television as all major pro wrestling matches these days do, although the match did air on television later that night and the match itself drew an amazing 9.9 rating airing at approximately 1:40 a.m. later that evening. The 1-hour show itself drew a 6.1 rating which would be roughly a 50 share in that time slot. This resulted in a legitimate full house of 63,000 fans, but it was significantly papered due to the weak advance. The full house was considered impressive because the show was held during a rainstorm and that meant virtually everyone with free tickets showed up anyway. Usually when a house is papered, a large percentage of those given tickets wind up not attending because it was held during a rainstorm. The Antonio Inoki era in New Japan is clearly over, and Shinya Hashimoto, who has headlined more big gates than any wrestler in history, was not on the show, leaving it from a drawing standpoint a 2-match show. The reports we have indicate it was considered a good but not great show, but fans didn't consider the lineup a dome-quality show. The 2 matches that drew were Onita vs. Chono, with a disappointing non-ending as both men were blown up twice and couldn't continue, and Keiji Muto vs. Don Fry. There was a storyline in that Chono probably could have won, but he showed mercy on Onita. The other was the strong finish, seeing the UFC star Fry tap out to an armbar from IWGP heavyweight champion Muto. This was said to be a hot match. The main event exemplified the typical New Japan booking pattern of using people who have made legit reputations elsewhere, having them put New Japan guys over to continue the illusion of New Japan having the superior fighting athletes. Earlier in the show, Alexander Otsuka tapped out in an interpromotional tag team to New Japan's Kazuo Yamazaki. After the Muto Fry match was over, Chono, who was at ringside doing television commentary, went into the ring with Fry and they left together, teasing the idea of Chono and Fry forming a heel unit within New Japan. 1. Chono and Onita went to a double knockout in 16:10 in a no-rope explosive barbed wire match. The first 3 minutes were supposed to be done to where the explosives weren't turned on. Onita came to the ring doing the Sandman gimmick, smoking a cigarette, and was pelted with a ton of garbage, which is so unlike Japanese fans it isn't even funny. Chono came out in a tank smoking a cigar. They punched, kicked and traded chair shots for the first 3 minutes before the second bell rang, indicating the explosive portion of the match was beginning. Onita tried to throw Chono into the barbed wire, but he blocked it. After trading chair shots, Chono got mad and threw the chair at the ropes, causing the first explosion, but only the chair felt the damage. Eventually Onita was able to throw Chono into the barbed wire and the explosives went off. Chono threw Onita into the barbed wire. The third time saw Onita, Chono and Ref Uno, the referee from the War promotion who was viewed as a neutral referee, all hit the barbed wire for a third explosion. All three sold it as if they were dead. New Japan ref Masao Hattori hit the ring and tried to revive Uno unsuccessfully. Onita and Chono got up but Uno didn't, so Hattori took over as referee. Onita used his Thunderfire powerbomb while Chono came back using a back suplex. Onita juiced really heavy from the arm from the barbed wire. Eventually Onita pulled Chono into the barbed wire for another explosion on both of them and Hattori counted to 10, ruling both men knocked out. Fans went nuts as the indecisive finish, which I guess now explains why this match was put on as the opener on the card. So the rest of the card would erase the memory of not being able to get a finish out of this match. Onita once again challenged Riki Choshu after the match. 2. Hiroyoshi Tenzan, Kim Kill-choi, and Satoshi Kojima beat Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi. Before the match started, Nagata threw Nakanishi out of the ring and the two didn't get along as partners. The finish saw Kojima catch Nakanishi in the new Kojima hold, a variation of a Fujiwara armbar, while Tenzan used a moonsault to pin Nagata. 3. Tatsuhiro Takaiwa pinned Minoru Tanaka of the Battle Arts promotion in 1452 using his triple bomb and Death Valley bomb combination finisher. This was said to have been a good match with Tanaka impressing everyone. 4. Great Sasuke, Masanori Murakawa, and Jushin Liger, Keiichi Yamada won the IWGP Junior Heavyweight Tag Team titles from Dr. Wagner Jr., Manuel Gonzalez, and Kendo Kashin Tokumitsu Ishizawa, in 1555 when Liger pinned Wagner after a brainbuster from off the top rope. There are a couple of interesting political twists to this result. The first is that a holder of a New Japan title will be appearing on the All Japan Tokyo Dome show on May 2nd. The other is that Sasuke and Liger will be defending their titles on an upcoming show for Michinoku Pro Wrestling. This was said to be a good match. 5. Koji Kanemoto retained the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title pinning Shinjiro Otani in 27:03 after a dragon suplex and a moonsault. This was reported as being the best match on the show. 6. In an interpromotional shooters tight battle, New Japan's Kazuo Yamazaki and Kazuyuki Fujita beat the Battle Arts team of Alexander Otsuka, Takashi Otsuka, and Yuki Ishikawa in 11:27 when Yamazaki made Otsuka submit to a knee lock. Of course it was a big deal for Otsuka to tap out since he made himself into a big name in both wrestling and martial arts, beating Marco Ruiz in a Vale Tudo match in the same building in October. This was said to be a good match. 7. Kensuke Sasaki and Shiro Koshinaka retained the IWGP Tag Team titles, beating Tatsumi Fujinami and Genichiro Tenryu. Genichiro Shimade in 1713 when Koshinaka pinned Fujinami after a powerbomb, while at the same time Sasaki had Tenryu caught in the Scorpion Deathlock. This was reported to us as being a bad match, with Fujinami and Tenryu looking very old in the ring. They looked so bad that after the match, Kotetsu Yamamoto, a former wrestler and longtime official with New Japan, basically told reporters that both men looked over the hill, which for a Japanese company member to come out and say is quite a statement. 8. Muto beat Fry with the armbar submission in 12:16 to retain the IWGP Heavyweight title. This was said to be a hot match. Fans were into the match because Fry sold a lot, and the fans are into every Fry match as long as he sells. Muto did the low drop kicks to the knee and dragon screws to work the leg. They traded submissions. Fry was punching away at Muto when Muto caught the arm for the finish. In the midst of all the company turmoil, WCW on April 11th, from the Tacoma Dome, put on the best pay-per-view match and show of the year. The show, paced by Juventud Guerrera and Blitzkrieg, coming maybe one missed spot away from a match of the year caliber performance, in a match that was even better the second time you see it, a great brawl with Hawk vs. Bam Bam Bigelow to give the show the best opening two matches on a pay-per-view dating back a few years, was dominated by the usual politics. Hulk Hogan, who is the master player behind the scenes, did an injury angle to set up taking another retirement, as Hogan now claimed on Jay Leno this past week that he never said he had retired on Thanksgiving night, only that he was tired. The move came without much warning, although he was telling people on the Tonight Show set that he'd be doing an injury angle at the pay-per-view and be out of action for a few months. The motives can only be speculated on. Hogan, or at least those close to him, were telling friends that he recognized he was getting stale. The babyface turn wasn't really working as well as he'd hoped for, and needed another break. It may have also been that surveying the landscape brings the obvious conclusion that this is a company going down, and to the corporates who know nothing about wrestling other than it was a $30 million a year company before Hogan got there and it was a $200 million company in 1998, that it would be best for the illusion if Hogan wasn't around while it fell. Judging from his Mancow interview when he returned in January, that was his idea the last time, although as it turned out, WCW had a hugely successful month of December without him, which kind of made the plan not work. This time it is far more likely to work as the ratings decline has been more prominent and more importantly, so many in the company have already mentally quit, although most didn't on this show. People noted that the Flair vs. Hogan matches at the house shows to date, while doing good business under normal circumstances, were doing less than WCW had been doing in those markets on shows Hogan hadn't appeared on, and couldn't compare with what WWF is now doing in these same markets. The advances for the future Hogan-Flair big market house show matches in April ranged from slightly disappointing to just okay. The buy rate for the second Hogan-Flair match, while hurt by coming the day after Louis Holyfield and being in the same month as WrestleMania, dropped 32% from their Super Brawl match despite it being the first pay-per-view after Hogan had been repositioned in the face role. In addition, from the company standpoint, while apparently a mark for what Hogan meant to building the company, and that's something that also can't be denied, Eric Bischoff has told people that Goldberg and Sting should be the top babyfaces. Hogan, due to dominating all the angles, would wind up with Goldberg positioned behind him, which is the worst thing possible for the company long term. Hogan had 3 house show bookings left against Flair, April 16th in Miami, which had only sold 5,800 tickets to the big arena, April 18th in Tampa, which had 5,121 tickets to the Sun Dome, April 30th at the Nassau Coliseum, which had a solid but not great advance of 8,330, and May 1st in Philadelphia at the Spectrum, which sold an unspectacular 4,328 tickets its first weekend. Miami and Tampa will now be headlined by Flair vs. Savage. Nassau and Philadelphia will switch to triangle matches for the title with Page vs. Flair vs. Sting plus Savage vs. Bagwell. Nobody will remember that Hogan went on the road these major markets and couldn't come close to filling buildings during the hottest period in wrestling history because it won't happen. Hogan, at least backstage, wasn't acting as if he was concerned over the alleged connection to Dr. Edmund Chain from the ESPN special, and nobody seems to be talking as if this is a reason for this injury, although NBC is said to be working on a piece on steroid use in wrestling, and Hogan did take a 1-year hiatus from wrestling and strongly teased retirement when the heat started coming down on him the last time in 1992. The end result was that Diamond Dallas Page became the most unlikely world champion of this lineal organization since Ronnie Garvin in 1987. Page, 44, who did work hard enough and smart enough to take advantage of the doors opened for him by having friends in high places, I'd suggest that 85% of the wrestlers put in the same position as Page with the same friends wouldn't have accomplished close to what he is because they wouldn't have worked as hard to get it, but the other 15% that would have worked that hard would probably all be much bigger stars given the same opportunities to actually make himself into a legitimate major star in the sport. The fans never quite accepted him as a star nearly on the level he was being pushed, although they do accept him as a star since he was positioned as much during a star-making period in wrestling with all the mainstream viewers. In recent weeks, the crowd began turning against him, most notably at the Super Brawl pay-per-view in San Francisco when he did the stretcher injury job for Scott Steiner to gain sympathy, and the result was the opposite. The reaction led to those in power to suggest he turn heel, and he didn't quite do that, but did develop more of a bad attitude in a pre-taped interview that aired on the March 39 Nitro for his return, which actually appeared to be an attempt to gain popularity, but when the crowd live in Toronto saw him as a total heel, he went with it and turned on them, but then worked against Hogan, trying to look strong as a face rather than as a feeding heel for Hogan, who was over huge in that one city due to his history in the market. Page was working as a face in the 4-way title match with Ric Flair, Sting and Hogan with Randy Savage as referee, and got the weakest crowd reaction coming out of the 5 for Sting and Hogan, which pretty well left it to Flair to carry the match. 3 ways and 4 ways are inevitably hard to follow and disjointed, and this match was no exception. WCW succeeded as usual in ending the card with a weak match. When Page, due to Savage turning on Flair, used the diamond cutter on Flair to win the title change pop despite it being a totally hot crowd in Tacoma, was as weak as you'll ever see for a world title change. Flair, due to his experience, has the best understanding of any wrestler active, and maybe in history, at playing world champion. Even though he's not the wrestler he once was, he was still the best of the 4 in the ring that night, and he was having a bad night himself, and it was almost embarrassing to see how badly he worked with Page, but he did a good job with Sting, and Hogan just had one of those nights where he looked like Hogan, so Flair couldn't help him. The reality is that Flair could still be the best worker in the business, and at 50, he simply should not be world champion, particularly in a business so youth-oriented and with the perception in a competitive environment of WCW being the over-the-hill gang. It is just no longer, the situation being what it is, the time for Flair to be champion. So instead you have a guy who works hard and generally is a good worker, although he wasn't in this match, but still has none of the charisma, drawing power, ability to pull off great interviews and angles, and most importantly, ratings pulling power that Flair has. But Flair's lone drawback, the age, is the same problem Page has since he's 43 but looks considerably older than his age. At least when Garvin won the title from Flair in Detroit in 1987, the crowd that night in that building popped huge for the title change, even if, the moment Garvin came on television wearing Flair's belt, his title reign and the TV ratings, which nosedived 25% over that quarter, wound up as a piece of history that would be better off forgotten. Page will probably have a similar short run, with most speculation at this point being he'll drop the title to Kevin Nash at Slamboree on May 9th, but that idea being WCW will probably change once a week between now and then. Nash isn't a good choice for the title unless he's simply an interim champ to finally build to a major match the right way where he puts Bill Goldberg over, although after doing the clean job for Goldberg this time, would he be willing to repeat the honors a second time? Which it appears most everyone in the company does acknowledge should be the end result of this title passing the hat game. Nash has more star presence than Page, but usually stinks in the ring, and because of his size, only Goldberg would be able to be taken as a serious challenger for him. Nowadays, who has the title is less important than cohesive storylines, and that, more than losing Hogan or having the wrong guy on top, will be WCW's greatest problem even if they continue to put on shows like this. The show drew a sellout of 17,690 to the Tacoma Dome, which was 16,799 paying $582,230 and another $106,217 in merchandise. 1. Juventud Guerrera and Aníbal Gonzalez pinned Blitzkrieg, Jeremiah Ross, in 11:11. It was absolutely amazing, even working with a guy the caliber of Guerrera, that a wrestler with a lack of experience as Blitzkrieg could put on a match this good on a national pay-per-view. Blitzkrieg is far from a great wrestler today, but he is more spectacular than Rey Mysterio Jr., Guerrera, or any of them were at the same stage of their career. Having seen the guy work a few indie shows before his WCW days, it's really amazing how quickly he's progressed. The crowd went nuts, and it really says something when two guys who aren't pushed got more heat than any other match on the show. Guerrera did a spectacular dive off the top. Blitzkrieg in spots was slightly tentative, but Guerrera covered for him. He did this incredible plancha off the top about 80% of the way to the other post, and Guerrera caught him with a dropkick. Blitzkrieg then did the Takamichinoku move where he goes from the ring, lands on the top rope, reverses his position on the top, and basically does a top rope Asai moonsault to the floor. The only negative spot was some sort of a top rope slam or flip that they botched up. Blitzkrieg missed a sky twister press and Guerrera signaled for the juvie driver, but Blitzkrieg turned that into an inside cradle. Blitzkrieg did some sort of a leg whip into a cradle off the ropes. The finish saw Guerrera come off the middle rope with a spectacular-looking juvie driver for the pin. The finish was fantastic, but I hope to never see it again because that's the kind of a move that with one mistake could result in somebody getting a broken neck too easily. 4.25 stars. 2. Bam Bam Bigelow. Scott Bigelow pinned Hawk, James Fullington, in 11:33. This was really the perfect match to follow the previous one because it was totally different. Hawk was out there literally killing his body to get himself in the match over. Unlike the luchadores, who risk injury when they do the spectacular flying moves, Hawk, at 270 pounds, out there doing the stunt work is pretty much guaranteeing a very difficult life once he gets past 40. Hawk came out with a table and wrapped in the WCW barbed wire. Bigelow came out with a crate of weapons. Unlike most matches of this type, which are a mess because so much looks bad, this was really good. They traded hard garbage can shots. Tony Schiavone in his infinite retardedness killed those by saying that they sounded great but really don't hurt, which is actually true, but by saying it ruins the illusion of it. Geez, in real life, those hard chops to the chest make a great noise and they do hurt, but they don't do serious damage, so why not just bury everything everyone does? Hawk did a somersault off a stagecoach prop onto Bigelow through a table. Bigelow bent a metal crutch on Hawk. They finally got in the ring at 2:50. After Schiavone explained how the garbage can shots really don't hurt, Bigelow went out to kill him dead with a wicked shot that apparently didn't hurt. Schiavone then said it made a great noise but didn't hurt as bad as it sounded. Bigelow then hit him with a cookie sheet, him being Hawk, not Shuvani, who probably deserved the blow by this point. Hawk brought out a ladder. Hawk dropkicked the ladder into Bigelow. That looked bad, as the move missed. Hawk somersaulted off the top onto the ladder, which was on Bigelow. I'm sure he's making his chiropractor wealthy. He bulldogged Bigelow on the ladder. More garbage can spots. Hawk climbed the ladder, but Bigelow pulled the ladder down and Hawk went flying over the top rope and somersaulted going through a table that he had set up between the ring apron and the guard rail. Hawk took a flip bump into the ladder. Hawk came off the top and missed a leg drop and landed on a guard rail that he brought into the ring. There are wrestlers with artificial knees and artificial hips who didn't do this many crazy things in their entire careers, as Hawk was doing in this match. Chastity brought out the fire extinguisher. Bigelow got it from her and sprayed her in the part of her body that half the wrestling universe has seen in recent weeks at their adult video racks. Hawk cracked Bigelow with the cane and used the Russian leg sweep with the cane. Bigelow actually got up from it and delivered a Death Valley driver off the middle rope through a table. In the replay you could see that Bigelow totally protected Hawk on this move, and I'm glad somebody has mercy on his body at this point. And the idea was that Hawk's head was to go through the table and hit the fire extinguisher on the mat for the pin. 3.5 stars. 3. Scotty Riggs, Scott Untall, pinned Mikey Whipwreck, John Watson, in 7:03. The crowd gave these guys no chance and were hating them vociferously. Riggs came out with a mirror that read better looking each day. Obviously that doesn't refer to his career prospects. Mike Tenay brought up that Joe Namath made up that saying I can't wait until tomorrow because I get better looking each day, which I believe was the title of Namath's autobiography in 1968, and the saying was later made more famous in a song by Mac Davis in the 70s. There were loud boring chants 40 seconds into the match. Whipwreck worked hard, particularly doing a pescado into a Hurricane Rana on the floor and taking a great guardrail bump. Riggs didn't do much, winning with a flying forearm. 1/2 star. 4. Conan, Charles Ashenoff, pinned Disco Inferno, Glenn Gilberti, in 9:17. This was similar to the previous match as Disco worked really hard but the other guy won. Disco was given most of the offense. Conan seemed sluggish and off a slight bit when he made his comeback, but the crowd was into him. Conan used Disco's own Last Dance, formerly the Chartbuster, currently the Stone Cold Stunner, for the pin. After the match, Conan looked right into the camera and said, "Not tired," which I guess was a reference to Kevin Nash going on television a few months back and saying Conan lacked heart and conditioning. 1.25 stars. 5. Rey Mysterio Jr., Oscar Gutierrez, pinned Billy Kidman, Peter Gruner, in 15:32 to retain the WCW Cruiserweight title. You know what the most amazing thing about these guys is? Kidman came out literally swimming in baby oil, and they did a match doing all that high-tech stuff and they never slip and slide off. This match was disappointing for 2 reasons. The first was that the crowd wasn't into it. The second is Beat Mysterio Jr. nearly knocked himself out doing a spinning head scissors off the guardrail onto the floor when his head accidentally cracked into the ring steps at the 3:30 mark. He actually got up and did the rest of the match, and the two didn't even miss any spots and did their high degree of difficulty moves, but Mysterio Jr. sort of lost his fire because his head was ringing. The match consisted of one great well-executed spot after another, but the lack of heat and transitions hurt it. Kidman may have hurt his knee. They both did dives, with Mysterio Jr. doing a Silver King tope con hilo. At the finish, Kidman used a pedigree and went on top. Mysterio Jr. got up and went up with him, but Kidman did a sunset flip power bomb spot off the top for a near fall. Kidman went up again, but Mysterio Jr. got up and shook and ropes and crotched him, then delivered the Frankensteiner off the top for the pin. 3 stars. 6. Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko, Dean Simon, beat Raven, Scott Levy, and Perry Saturn, Perry Sotolo, in 14:11. The crowd was totally behind Raven as a babyface, probably because Raven's grunge personality is considered an original product of the Seattle nightclub scene many years ago. Arn Anderson got a total heel reaction coming out with Benoit and Malenko, and both times during the match when Anderson got decked got 2 of the biggest pops of the show. Another very good match. Saturn put Benoit's head inside his dress. Thankfully with Benoit, I didn't have to worry about what he'd do once in there. Malenko used a power bomb into a cloverleaf, but Saturn made the ropes in a good spot. Saturn did a Death Valley driver on Malenko, but Benoit saved with a headbutt off the top, and Saturn kicked out of that pin attempt. They got heat on Saturn at that point. After the second time Anderson took a bump, Saturn set Malenko up on a table outside the ring for the big plancha. Anderson pulled Malenko to safety and Saturn took the bump through the table. In the ring, Raven used the DDT on Malenko. Anderson hit Raven with a chair and put the chair on top of him, Benoit came off the top rope with a diving headbutt onto the chair on Raven and Malenko pinned Raven. Benoit busted up his own head above the eye hard way by smashing it onto the chair in the landing and went to the hospital after the match and needed several stitches. 3.5 stars. 7. Scott the walking lawsuit waiting to happen. Scott reached Steiner, won the vacant U.S. title in the tourney final pinning Booker Huffman, in 15:57. Steiner basically threatened everyone in the first 2 rows of ringside for the first few minutes. It's bad enough that Steiner's stuff makes the air, but when it's audible that he's calling Booker T boy on the air is something that could come back and haunt the company. In the ring he took T down and began throwing elbows to the back of the head a la a UFC fight. Mike Tenay remarked something about him showing his amateur wrestling background from college. Like in college, wrestling elbows to the back of the neck are legal. Lots of suplexes and lots of steroid chants. Steiner did the most blatant low kick you'd ever see right in front of the ref. They made it that ref Johnny Boone was afraid to DQ Steiner for a blatant foul. Most of the match was the Steiner show and T didn't get to do much. At one point Steiner suplexed him on the back of his head. Boone got sandwiched in between the two and T delivered an axe kick followed by a side kick but no ref to count the fall. As Boone was getting up, Steiner clobbered him again. T used a sidewalk slam but again no ref. T climbed to the top but Steiner fell into the ropes and T was crotched. Steiner used a Frankensteiner off the top and grabbed Boone and put his hand down for the count but T kicked out. Shuvani said that we haven't seen Steiner do that move in ages. Doesn't anybody pay attention? At this point Randy Anderson ran out to help Boone. Steiner pulled out a foreign object. T picked him up for a vertical suplex but Steiner hit him with the object and a dazed Boone ran in and counted the fall. 2.5 stars. 8. Bill Goldberg pinned Kevin Nash in 7:44. Nash had the early advantage including using a low blow and a side slam. Goldberg powered Nash over with a front chancery into a suplex. Goldberg went for a spear but Nash leapfrogged him and Goldberg destroyed ref Mickey J. Actually Nash looked good for a spot. Nash used a chair shot on Goldberg. Goldberg made the big recovery using the claw to the groin, followed by a spear and jackhammer. 1 star. 9. Diamond Dallas Page Falkenberg captured the WCW title in the four-way over Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, Ric Flair, Richard Fliehr, and Sting, Steve Borden, in 17:27. Randy Savage came out first as ref with Pamela Anderson lookalike Gorgeous George, which reminds me, has anyone seen Tori Wilson of late? Page got the weakest reaction of the 5 coming out. Savage, who hadn't been seen in months, got the best reaction, and he was the only one given pyro to jump-start his pop. Savage was much bigger than the other 3 and he's older than all of them except Flair. The match was atrocious early with no heat. Hogan leg-dropped Flair but Sting saved. Flair versus Hogan was the focal point early but the brawling was bad. Sting worked with Page and they had no rhythm and nobody cared. When Flair worked with Page it was a total mess. Page did the Bret Hart figure 4 around the post on Hogan, who sold it big. Sting saved Hogan but trainer Danny Young ran out and Hogan was helped to the back selling his knee big time. Eric Bischoff came out looking concerned to sell the injury. It was real sad, or maybe it wasn't, that with Hogan being helped out a few weeks after the big face turn, all you could hear from the crowd is people screaming at Hogan to retire. The match got a lot better once Hogan was out of there, but it still wasn't good. Page reversed a tombstone on Sting but Flair saved Sting. Sting used a superplex on Flair. They did the double sleeper spot and double jawbreaker spot. Sting got the scorpion on Flair but Page saved. Sting used the scorpion death drop reverse DDT on Page but Flair saved. Flair got the figure 4 on Sting but Sting made the ropes. Savage refused to break it and instead dragged them from the ropes to the middle of the ring, theoretically helping Flair. He then jumped off the top with an elbow onto Flair. Finally Page used the diamond cutter on Flair for the pin. 1.25 stars. WCW is now paying for its sins of the past year plus. Despite putting on its best Nitro in a long time, and a very strong first hour, the audience pattern remained the same with Nitro doing a poor first hour, problems created with those absolutely awful first hours for several weeks and people have gotten in the habit of not wasting their time in the first hour and then this time they had a lot of star power and a really good cruiserweight title match on early, and even putting emphasis on the returns of Randy Savage, Sting and Roddy Piper on a major level to Nitro didn't help things. For the most part, these ratings have been determined by who has the star power. What several in WCW failed to realize is that last year, when WWF started winning, the guys that were building those numbers became the stars, and not people like Sting, Savage, and Piper. Raw won all 8 head-to-head quarters with only one close period, posting a 6.25 rating, 6.27 first hour, 6.23 seconds hour, and a 9.6 share to Nitro's 4.36 rating, 4.38 first hour, 4.05 seconds hour, 4.64 third hour, and 6.8 share. The head-to-head period was identical to the overall period at 6.25 to 4.36, which basically meant even with a world title change that nobody cared about and the return of the aforementioned 3 in a prominent role and a lot better wrestling product than the company had been delivering, Nitro's rating was the same as last week. Raw's rating was up even with revolving the show around an Undertaker angle that a lot of people are complaining was boring but still popped a number. Then again, last year when Nitro was popping numbers and people were complaining it was boring, in the long run the complaints were valid. Raw's peak was a 6.83 rating for the Godfather vs. Goldust IC title change, and one of about 1 million ministry attacks on Ken Shamrock, nearly beating WCW by 3 points, which did a 3.98 for the way too long Ricky Rackman and the DJ segments. These segments are total channel switchers, a long commercial break, and the beginning of Flair vs. Sting. Flair vs. Sting wound up at a 5.47, by far the highest point for WCW head-to-head. The overrun did a 5.4. But that's going 3 minutes unopposed at the end since Raw ended first, but even with Sting and Savage in an angle opposing Flair, it still lost to a 5.62 for the D'Lo Brown vs. Bob Holly match. Raw's low point. In comparing the main events, Raw's Triple H and Test vs. X-Pac and Kane did a 6.23 while Nitro's Page vs. Scott Steiner did a 4.53. The two main media items of the past week on pro wrestling were the ABC 2020 feature on Backyard Wrestling, which aired on April 7th, and the April 16th Entertainment Weekly cover feature on wrestling with Bill Goldberg on the cover. Neither were monumental. The 2020 feature was almost exactly what we figured it would be when writing about it last week. The feature was largely about Andre Verdun and Nick Teal of Buena High School in Ventura County, a county which no doubt, if regular media stories not on wrestling had the same accuracy as its wrestling stories, that someday soon they would say that county was named after a famous governor of Minnesota. The show featured interviews with Mick Foley as the hero to all backyard wrestlers, and Vince McMahon. Foley came across pretty good to me, but not as good to the general public. My feeling was when Foley was watching the footage of the kids play fighting with chairs and the like, he was just saying they looked like they were having fun and they weren't actually fighting each other or trying to hurt each other. Foley, when showing a stunt that he inspired of Teal jumping off the roof of a house onto Verdun and putting him through a table, that he would never do a stunt like that because he was putting the other guy in danger, and when he did it, from a higher height but onto a bed mattress as opposed to a table, he wasn't jumping on another person. As mentioned last week, while it looks different, it doesn't appear to be any more dangerous than kids playing tackle football in the street or doing skateboard stunts on blacktop. However, Foley's saying what he does is a modern-day version of Adam West and Burt Ward, TV's Batman and Robin in the 60s, that led to he and his brothers fighting in the kitchen as little kids. I don't think held up, because I don't recall kids strapping themselves into things that were going to result in their heads being sliced open and trying to play Houdini to escape like happened in that show's cliffhangers. But kids will emulate Mick Foley because they know that's real-life stunts, although not real-life sports, as opposed to fake television. McMahon came across good saying that people should not try and emulate the stunts the wrestlers do because the wrestlers are trained, and even then, they often get hurt. The piece did have its gross moments, mainly a kid who smashed his head into a light bulb not from Ventura County and put his stitched-up face on the internet. There was no mention of anyone actually getting hurt or any epidemic of injuries, and without such, it's hard to consider this seriously as any kind of a story other than kids being kids, because anyone who has ever been a kid has done things that could hurt them at one time or another. It's too bad they interviewed Nick Teal and Andre Verdun from the high school and not Jim Henson. Who is Henson? It's their other friend who doesn't do the backyard wrestling stunts with them anymore. He screwed up his neck when Verdun dropped him on his head without knowing how to protect him doing a DDT. But Henson figures the injury was worth it anyway. They were unpopular kids in high school at an age when being cool is everything. They've been on 2020. Nobody else at the school can make the claim, so now they're the cool ones. It's a notoriety we've wanted since our freshman year, Henson said to Ventura County Star on April 11th, a few days after the television show aired. Doesn't everyone want to be famous? All I know is the straight A students aren't on 2020, said Steve Marquez, another student at the school. The piece was weak because all wrestling was lumped together, as they showed clips of WCW, ECW, and WWF as the ones who inspired the kids to do these crazy stunts. As anyone with even the slightest bit of research into the subject would know, the stunts the kids were doing, like hitting each other with fluorescent light tubes, were all taken from pro wrestling, but it was largely underground tapes of IWA wrestling out of Kentucky or the real gross Japanese groups like Big Japan, and certainly not WCW. And while the Foley copycat stunts were to an extent WWF inspired, these kids clearly were copying something a lot more violent looking than WWF is. For that reason, I don't think McMahon should be the one held responsible when it is not his wrestling promotion stunts, aside from the fact Foley works for him and they are copying some of his WWF and Japanese stunts, and the table breaking which was created elsewhere, and every promotion has copied it. The piece led to an interesting article in the local paper. It said that after the clips, which to an average person portrayed the kids in a very negative light and which led to outraged letters to the editor and community-wide shock that something like that was happening in their city, that they had learned their lesson. The lesson they learned? Anything that garners attention is desirable. Verdun is looking for ways to stay in the news, such as a publicity stunt protest against the local law enforcement agencies, who have attempted to shut down his shows, and against critics of backyard wrestling. EW did the ultimate puff piece and whitewash job on pro wrestling, although it's to be somewhat expected given the nature of the magazine. It was clear the mag was unconcerned with any facts, and their research was limited to inane interviews with wrestlers, which consisted of asking them the last book they read and how big their biceps were, and a glance reading at the Lou Albano book. It talked about the soap opera-driven product of today, with brief profiles of the biggest stars: Goldberg, Scott Steiner, Flair, Austin, Mankind, Undertaker, Rock and China. It had the lamest Raw versus Nitro comparison ever written. It noted the huge increase in ratings of the WWF shows and how big-name advertisers are no longer running from wrestling as they did in the past. It listed that wrestling draws 35 million viewers per week. Even adding every viewer up multiple times for each show they watch gets you to 22 million on cable and probably 26 million overall, and that the WWF took in more than $30 million on pay-per-view at WrestleMania. According to the latest estimates of how Mania did, the real number would be $13 million. They credit McMahon for the popularity of wrestling, and he deserves some credit, but hardly all the credit, being that wrestling was popular before McMahon and is and has been popular in parts of the world where McMahon isn't even a factor. It claimed in 1982 he gave up the pretense of real competition and called it sports entertainment. That's funny because I can remember numerous conversations in 1991 and 1992 with McMahon trying to explain to me what a horrible thing I was doing to the world in general, because I was revealing that Santa Claus, which I guess was his term at the time for pro wrestling, wasn't real, as if anyone needed me to clue them in on it in the first place. Now he's embracing that and claims he's been doing so since 1982. It got bigger according to the article. In 1988, when Ted Turner created WCW, he just created it. It's not like wrestling on Ted stations weren't the highest rated shows of any kind on cable, dating back more than a decade before he bought an existing company and before the media caught on to the cable ratings 20 years later. There were quotes from Barry Blaustein, who directed Nutty Professor, and is doing a documentary called Beyond the Mat for Imagine Entertainment, and talked of WWF launching its own record label, WCW negotiating with NBC about possible specials and a TV movie, and both companies looking at developing television series based on wrestling, WCW working with Warner Brothers for a movie, and WWF negotiating with Columbia Pictures. In the brief profiles, the bicep sizes were really funny. Like Undertaker has 20-inch arms, or Rock's are 22. Arnold Schwarzenegger in his roided-up prime had 21s. Scott Steiner, whose arms probably are the biggest of anyone in wrestling, claimed his arms are 26 inches. I'm surprised he didn't say he was 7 feet tall as well. They also listed a Wrestling Hall of Fame, clearly New York-based, since the 6 names listed were Lou Albano, Chief Jay Strongbow, Fred Blassie, Gorilla Monsoon, Bruno Sammartino, and Billy Graham. And how can they whitewash a story if they include a brief bio on Billy Graham? Right out of Albano's book. Early steroid use may have helped him win Mr. Teenage America. The slightest bit of research would say something different. Suffered arthritis in the 80s, so that's what it was. Attempted a comeback in 1987 but dropped out after joint surgery, so that's what it was. Now paints at home. They talked about literally head-to-head Raw vs. Nitro competition on September 27th in Atlanta, with Raw scheduled for the Georgia Dome and Nitro for the new Phillips Arena, which is next door and the buildings literally share the same parking lot, isn't going to be taking place. Jim Ross released on the WWF website that the Georgia Dome officials had pulled the date from the WWF, claiming it would cause confusion in the marketplace, and that the company was willing to go head-to-head. For reasons mentioned last week, largely the fact that WWF hadn't run a house show in Atlanta in more than 7 years, while Nitro has been held in Atlanta at the larger Georgia Dome on 3 occasions over the past 16 months already, and a fourth date is scheduled for July 5th. WWF being the new product, not to mention the hotter product, would certainly have the advantage, even though WCW's home base is Atlanta, and historically WWF has never drawn well in Atlanta. But those historical good and bad cities as residue from the territorial days of the 80s are all out the window today. According to Ed Cohen, who handles arena bookings for the WWF, technically the date, which was actually booked close to 3 months before WCW booked the Phillips Arena as a counter, wasn't pulled. But he categorized it as the Georgia Dome officials strongly suggesting not running the date, and they were taking the suggestion and moving to another date. Cohen said several dates in August and September were being discussed. Other sources indicate that while not finalized, it is most likely the WWF's date at the Georgia Dome would be on either September 6th or September 7th, either being a Raw live show or taping. With a few matches remaining at press time, All Japan's Champion Carnival Tournament has come down to Kenta Kobashi, Vader, and Mitsuharu Misawa. After of the morning of April 14th, Vader had finished the tournament with 15 points, while Kobashi, with one match remaining against Gary Albright on April 14th, had 14 points. Misawa, with one match remaining in the tournament against Yoshihiro Takayama on April 14th, had 12 points. The top 2 point getters meet for the title on April 16th at Budokan Hall. It is interesting that the first tournament booked after the death of Baba seems to have the least exciting booking climax, as the tournament was down to the final 3 more than 1 week before its conclusion. Basically what this means is that Vader has clinched a spot in the finals. If Kobashi beats Albright, he wins the round robin and faces Vader at Budokan. If Kobashi and Albright draw, then they tie in the round robin and meet in the finals. If Albright beats Kobashi and Misawa beats Takayama, it would result in Misawa versus Kobashi at Budokan, with the winner facing Vader on the same show for the tournament final. In addition, New Japan announced its 9th annual Best of the Super Junior tournament, which will take place from May 19th to June 8th. The 12-man tournament will be broken up into 2 groupings, with each wrestler having 5 singles matches against the wrestlers in his block. The wrestler with the best record out of each group meets for the championship on June 8th at Budokan Hall. At press time, we don't have the respective groupings, but the wrestlers involved will be Jushin Liger, Koji Kanemoto, El Samurai, Kendo Kashin, Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Shinjiro Otani of New Japan, Minoru Tanaka of Battle Arts, Masaaki Mochizuki of War, Masao Orihara, who works for several independent offices, Shocker from EMLL, Dr. Wagner Jr. from EMLL, and Gran Hamada from Michinoku Pro. Japanese television rundown. March 22nd Rings. This was an interesting show, and whether it's in a good or bad, depends on your idea of what Rings should be. It was the first show since the ending of the Akira Maeda era, with him at ringside in his now familiar red suit as commissioner. All of the matches could be taken for shoots, and the ones that were worked primarily to appear to be shoots as opposed worked to be exciting matches. The old UWF style of work, to do pro wrestling and make it look real but build to spots and finishes and use eye-catching moves, was out the window, and instead it was only what works in a shoot. 1. Christopher Hazuman beat Yasuhito Namikawa in 7:42 with an over and under choke. Hazuman totally dominated the match and was ahead 3-0 before the submission on 3 rope break points. There was something about the third point that looked fishy, so I'd guess it was a worked match, although it wouldn't be easy to tell. Hazuman's worked matches are usually real good, but with a new style, nothing is going to be that good. 1 star. 2. Borislav Giliaskov beat Wataru Sakata in 8:28. This was a shoot match, but it was all on the ground and there was no striking. The mat work was very good. Giliaskov scored 1 point on a rope break. Sakata nearly got an armbar, but Giliaskov in escaping got a neck crank and Sakata tapped out. It didn't appear to be a finish, but it did appear that Sakata tore his right pec and tapped immediately. For pure mat work in a shoot, it was well done. 3. Masayuki Naruse beat Dave Van de Veen in 7:36 in another shoot. This was funny in that Van de Veen, with his big forearms and tattoos, is nicknamed Popeye, but I guess Popeye isn't famous in Japan, so they thought Popeye was his middle name, as he was billed as Dave Popeye Devane. Good stand-up fighting. Van de Veen threw some very hard body blows while they were on the ground. Naruse ended up winning with an ankle lock. 4. Yoshihisa Yamamoto beat Valentin Overeem in 2:40 with an armbar. This was good but too short. After a great standing exchange, Overeem got a choke, but Yamamoto struggled and got a rope break. The struggle to the ropes was clearly pro wrestling, although without that one spot, you'd be hard-pressed to see through this match. Yamamoto got the armbar and Overeem slipped out, but sold his elbow big time. The announcers even mentioned a broken elbow capsule. Overeem was selling the injury big, and a lot of the undercard wrestlers ran in the ring to sell it as well. 5. Ilyakine Mikhail beat Randy Couture in a Vale Tudo rules match in 7:43. This was the controversial match. This match was more evidence that the traditional pro wrestling ring is a poor playing field for Vale Tudo matches. Couture was dominant with both his boxing, which isn't very good, but it's worlds better than Mikhail's, and his wrestling. Couture kept the fight on the feet for 4 minutes before just manhandling Mikhail, who was outweighed 224 to 206, and throwing him down in the corner. Couture threw some more punches. A few times as they got into the ropes, they were put back in the center standing. At another point, Mikhail actually landed a lucky punch since Couture didn't have much defense, but was so stunned himself that he didn't follow up. The finish saw Couture take him down and Mikhail working from the bottom on a hammerlock as they got tangled in the ropes. Couture got up to move to the center and the ref said they had to go back to the original position. So they went in the center, Couture went on top and the ref put Couture's arm back in the hammerlock position and ordered a start. Mikhail made the move immediately and Couture tapped, as a reflex action, probably more as a motion to stop but that they hadn't started. The ref didn't stop the match and Mikhail kept the hold on and Couture appeared to tap again, although his team claims he was throwing short punches to the leg, and the match was stopped by the ref who may not have even seen whatever the second thing was, but thought the hold was dangerous. Couture looked furious and the Raw team management was protesting long and loud in the ring that he never tapped and that the hold wasn't at a strong enough angle to be dangerous and there may be credence to the latter point. The way I see it, with the contrived putting them back in and giving Mikhail the hold and he took the jump, the finish was totally screwed up and Couture absolutely was jobbed. But the Raw team loses some credibility claiming he didn't tap. Match was a better than average Vale Tudo match. 6. Kiyoshi Tamura beat Hiromitsu Kanehara in 2014 with an armbar. This was ruined by the new style. It was some awesome mat work early but it was very slow most of the way and they were taking it very easy on the striking so as not to risk hurting Tamura before the shoot match with Frank Shamrock. Tamura was made to look strong as he was ahead 3-0 before the finish. Tamura showed flashes but the style killed the heat since they didn't do any spots or display any of Tamura's quick spectacular mat work which would give away that the match is a work, but also make it a fun match for the fans. Right after the 20 minutes call, Tamura immediately went to the finish and it was so obvious he was waiting for the call to do it. The new style is better for the ring's purist that wants to believe every match is a shoot. The Japanese internet after this show was proclaiming this an all-shoot show but you can't market a major league product only to purists. There is no way this new direction is good for the average fan who would find this main event boring even though the announcers were putting it over as a great match, which if it had been a shoot going 20 minutes with some quick mat work and a few decent flurries standing, it probably would be considered that. 1 star. March 27, New Japan. 1. Masahiro Chono and Akira and NWO Sting beat Jushin Liger and Tatsumi Fujinami and Kazuo Yamazaki in 13-13. Basic solid fast-paced New Japan style match with Liger, Yamazaki and Akira carrying things. Finish saw Sting power slam Liger and Akira gain the pin with a splash off the top rope. After the match, Chono went backstage and grabbed a TV executive and told him that he wouldn't allow his match with Atsushi Onita at the Tokyo Dome to be televised. 2 3/4 stars. 2. Don Fry beat Manabu Nakanishi in 5:59. Fry threw a zillion punches at Nakanishi who was staggered, and then out of nowhere, Nakanishi came back with a spear and a torture rack. Fry started punching from the rack position, but Nakanishi threw him down into a stomach breaker. Nakanishi racked him again but Fry escaped by throwing elbows and grabbed a choke. He broke the hold, began throwing punch after punch straight down and grabbed another choke for the win. A simple match but it worked. 2 1/4 stars. 3. Kensuke Sasaki and Yuji Nagata beat Keiji Muto and Satoshi Kojima in 15:57. Only the second half was televised and it was good, particularly Nagata, who used a German suplex on Kojima followed by a facelock submission. After the match, Hiroyoshi Tenzan did a run-in and laid out Tadao Yasuda, who tried to make the save, and also did a diving headbutt on Nagata. 3 1/4 stars. 4. Dr. Wagner Jr. and Kendo Kashin retained the IWGP Junior Tag titles beating El Samurai and Gran Hamada in 14:49. It was really weird seeing a match like this as the main event for Nagoya Rainbow Hall since Samurai and Hamada aren't exactly over. The story of the match was that Samurai and Hamada destroyed Wagner's mask. He covered his face and was taken to the dressing room, leaving Ka Shin against both. Of course he returned with his old silver mask and cleaned house. They started trading near falls until Wagner planted Samurai into the ground with a Michinoku driver 2 and Ka Shin used the flying armbar with Samurai on the middle ropes for the submission. Good match, but hardly anything memorable for such a big show. 3¼ stars. March 28, All Japan. 1. Gary Albright and Yoshihiro Takayama and Takao Omori beat Vader and Johnny Ace and Manukia Mossman in 7:59 when Omori pinned Mossman after a lariat. The match mainly pushed Albright versus Vader. These two feuded many years ago in the old UWFI office, but it wasn't good at all. 2. Mitsuharu Misawa pinned Jinsei Shinzaki in 16:54. Something happened to Misawa as this was taped on the first night of the tour and he looked like hell with big knots stitched up in 2 places on his head like he'd been in a bad street fight or something. He wasn't moving well at all. Still, he understands how to build a match and even though it was slow-paced and dull for a long time, the crowd was into the last several minutes with near falls ending with Misawa using the running elbow smash. 2 stars. 3. Jun Akiyama pinned Akira Taue in 12:48. Most of the match aired and it was very good and fast-paced due to Akiyama. They were trading big spots before Akiyama got the pin after 2 exploder suplexes. This match was probably be even better unedited. 3¼ stars. March 29th UFO. This was the March 14th Yokohama Arena show. UFO is just work shoots that make for bad pro wrestling because they don't look like shoots and the fans that attend are pro wrestling fans and pop more for pro wrestling spots than shoot spots unlike rings fans. As Antonio Inoki has explained to many, he believes that New Japan has gone too far in copying American pro wrestling and has lost its legitimacy and he's trying to get it back. What a lot of old-timers haven't grasped is that legitimacy is the single least important thing to pro wrestling fans. They just want something to get them in their gut and then entertain them and they are willing to accept preposterous-looking things and accept them if they are entertaining, but could care less about boring-looking things, even if they appear to be closer to real. The show opened with a tribute to Giant Baba by Antonio Inoki, which was a nice touch considering their past problems. 1. Tiger Mask 4 of Michinoku Pro beat Jean-Pierre David of France in 6:27. UFO has a circular ring so there is plenty of space on the apron to continue fighting. At one point David used a judo throw off the apron sending Mask to the floor. Later Tiger Mask kicked David off the apron. David sold Big a spectacular kick that missed. It reminded me of Bill Watts years ago when someone would sell a drop kick that clearly missed and Watts would immediately pick up on it and say the heel that took the bump went down on reflex. Tiger Mask nearly killed him with a hard kick to the chin to set up the choke finish. During the match, David's second, Richard Roland Rex, a huge but very old-looking French judo guy, jumped into the ring and looked like he was going to interfere and he dwarfed little Tiger Mask. 2 stars. 2. Orlando Vite beat Sean McCulley in 6:26 with a guillotine choke submission. McCulley, who is fighting in the next UFC, why I have no idea, physically looked unimpressive as he was small and didn't look in shape. He mainly would take Vite, a kickboxer, who got almost no chance to show his stuff, to the ground. It wasn't that bad for what it was. 1 star. 3. Koichiro Kimura beat Richard Roland Rex in 1:54 with an armbar. Rex looked like a cross between Ralphus and Frank Valois. He did do one nice judo throw before getting the armbar put on him. Needless to say this was bad. Dud. 4. Alexander Otsuka beat original Tiger Mask, Satoru Sayama, in 9:26. This was a rematch of their December 30th match, which was the best match in the short history of the promotion. This was also very good with Sayama throwing a lot of nice kicks including one that split Otsuka's mouth open. Sayama's kicks totally blow X-Pacs away. Still, the biggest pop on the show was Otsuka using a giant swing, and that's in a supposed shoot situation which again showed these were pro wrestling fans and wanted to see pro wrestling spots. Sayama used a tiger suplex and the crowd liked that as well. Otsuka got the ankle lock and Sayama stayed in it a long time before submitting. This may be the last time we see Sayama in the ring in pro wrestling. 3¼ stars. 5. Kazunari Murakami no contest Gerard Gordeau in 8:12. Just awful. Gordeau in the pre-match interview said he thought he was fighting Don Frye, and then said he had no idea who Murakami was and asked if he was a jiu-jitsu guy or a shooter. Gordeau did his dirty fighting, and since these were pro wrestling fans, they didn't mind, including attacking the eyes and grabbing the groin and holding the ropes to avoid going down. At one point Gordeau missed a kick to the head that would have killed Murakami had it hit. He went after the eyes. They were brawling on the floor. Gordo grabbed the groin and Murakami tried to grab it back. The second time this happened, the ref just stopped the match. -1 star. 6. Naoya Ogawa beat Dan Severn in 7:56 to win the NWA title with Dory Funk as referee. Before the match, they did a highlight package about the NWA World title belt and said it was the same title held by legends like Lou Thesz, Gene Kiniski, Dory Funk, Jack Briscoe, Baba, and Harley Race, and never mentioned any of the modern champions, Terry Funk or Ric Flair. It was an old-style match as they do the clean stuff and both tease losing their temper, and then Funk would blow his whistle. Fans popped and sort of laughed as well whenever the whistle would blow. Finish saw Ogawa hit Severn with a head slap, then Severn went for a shoot and was caught with a knee and Ogawa got him with a choke for the tap out. It wasn't good modern pro wrestling, but it did look like a contest and seemed satisfactory for what they were trying to accomplish. Ogawa is still a total Inoki creation and manipulation of Inoki's ideas that pro wrestling should be a sport dominated by real shooters manipulating outcomes of matches. Ogawa himself is nothing special in the ring, nor does he have charisma, but has the world judo title background, the fact he's pretty tall, and the endorsement of Inoki, who masterminded the Hashimoto deal, which in the weird Japanese mindset did make him something of a pro wrestling star when the gimmick of his background was starting to fade to wrestling fans as his calling cards. After the match, the announcers talked about Ogawa holding the title that can trace its history back to Frank Gotch, so that myth is international in scope. Television ratings rundown. The latest update on all WWF and WCW performers that have appeared as a main focal point of a competitive segment at least 5 times in 1999. A competitive segment constitutes between 9:15 and 11:05 p.m. on Monday nights, when both shows are on simultaneously. Ranked by quarter percentage increase or decrease. A plus 1.00 average rating means that on average when this person is featured on the show, the audience increased by 0.1 ratings points or about 75,500 homes or about 113,000 viewers. A plus 5.33, for example, would mean that on average, this person increases the viewing audience 602,000 viewers from the previous segment. A minus 4.00 would mean that on average, this person decreases the viewing audience 452,000 viewers from the previous segment. Updated as of April 12. Mexico. Business remains at a strong level for both promotions. AAA is drawing sellouts everywhere for the Perro Aguayo Farewell Tour. They are starting to use Mil Mascaras, Canek and Dos Caras more as drawing cards on top with Aguayo in his final days. EMLL's business remains strong, although neither Tuesday nor Friday this week sold out Arena Mexico. Friday came close to El Gigante Silva on top, and the Tuesday crowd of about 3,500 on April 6 was the lowest since mid-December, but with a main event of Team Yables Jr. and Ringo Mendoza and Brazo de Plata versus Cien Caras and Fuerza Guerrera and Blue Panther, and no undercard, that shouldn't be much of a surprise. Silva in the local press is being called a terrible wrestler, but they are saying that he is a drawing card due to his size. El Texano is doing an outsider gimmick in AAA. They are trying to act like Texano doesn't work for AAA, and Antonio Pena claims he's trying to get the commission to punish Texano for attacking Aguayo on the April 2 card. EMLL is teasing a heel turn for Shocker, who is leaving for the next 2 New Japan tours. Oriental beat M3 in a mask versus mask match on April 2 in Netzahualcoyot, and he revealed himself as Mario Moreno, aged 32. Rey Mysterio Jr. and Kanan worked April 9 in Tijuana before a packed house of about 5,500, beating Psicosis and Rey Mysterio in what was called a great match. All Japan. After the Budokan Hall show on April 16 and the Baba public funeral service the next day, a correction from recent weeks, Bruno Sammartino is only appearing at the Tokyo Dome show, not at the Baba funeral. All Japan has the Tokyo Dome on May 2nd, and then 3 more weeks off, with the next tour being May 22nd to June 11th, with big shows on May 22nd and May 23rd at Korakuen Hall, June 4th in Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center, June 6th in Kushiro at the Tottori Dome, June 9th in Sendai, and ending up on June 11th at Budokan Hall. Standings as of the morning of April 12 are: 1. Kenta Kobashi 6 wins, 0 losses, 2 draws. 2. Vader 7 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw. 3. Mitsuharu Misawa 5 wins, 1 loss, 2 draws. 4. Kiritao 5 wins, 3 losses, 1 draw. 5. Jun Akiyama 4 wins, 3 losses, 1 draw. 6. Johnny Ace 4 wins, 4 losses, 1 draw, and Gary Albright 4 wins, 4 losses. 8. Yoshihiro Takayama 1 win, 6 losses, 1 draw. 9. Jinsei Shinzaki 1 win, 7 losses, and 10. Takao Mori 0 wins, 8 losses, 1 draw. The 3 shows over the past week were April 8th in Osaka before 4,100 attendees with Akira Tao over Shinzaki with a Nadawa in 10 minutes and 53 seconds, Misawa pinned Ace with a running elbow in 12 minutes and 24 seconds, and Vader went to a 30-minute draw with Kobashi in their second ever singles meeting. April 10th in Shizuoka before a sellout 2,050 saw Takayama pin Shinzaki in 15 minutes and 12 seconds with a leg drop. Akiyama pinned Albright in 8 minutes and 11 seconds, and Misawa went to a 30-minute draw with Akira Tao. April 11th at Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2,100 saw Akiyama beat Omori with a Scorpion Deathlock in 23 minutes and 3 seconds of a great match. Vader pinned Takayama in 5 minutes and 13 seconds with a splash, and Kobashi drew Ace over 30 minutes. And April 13th in Yamagata saw Shinzaki pin Omori in 19 minutes and 35 seconds, Akira Tao pinned Takayama in 11 minutes, and Albright pin Ace in 7 minutes and 33 seconds. I'm not certain of this, but believe they may have an old tape, which would have to be from the 70s, of Giant Baba and the Destroyer versus Bruno Sammartino and Gene Kiniski that will be played on the Giant Vision screen at the Tokyo Dome show. If that's the case, it's going to have to be spliced tapes of different matches, as I can't find a record of such a match taking place. The only time Sammartino ever wrestled in a tag match against Baba and Destroyer, his partner was Mr. Wrestling Tim Woods. Kiniski probably wrestled in tags with various partners against Baba and Destroyer several times. March 21st TV show did a 4.7 rating, while the March 28th show fell to a 2.3. New Japan. The next major show is May 3rd at Fukuoka Kakusai Center with Keiji Muto vs Genichiro Tenryu for the IWGP Heavyweight title, Kensuke Sasaki and Shiro Koshinaka defending the IWGP Tag titles against Kazuo Yamazaki and Yuji Nagata, and Koji Kanemoto defending the IWGP Junior title against Tatsuhito Takaiwa. New Japan also announced its Summer Strangle Tour from June 25th to July 21st, with the major shows on the tour being the final 2 nights at Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center. Referee Katsuhisa Shibata, a former pro wrestler in the 70s, will be retiring on the June 25th show. The G1 tournament, which is the best wrestling week of the year for any promotion in the world, will be extended to 5 days this year, with the beginning moved out of Tokyo Sumo Hall for the first time in years. The tournament will be August 10th and August 11th at Osaka Furitsu Gem, and August 13th, 1st and 15th at Tokyo Sumo Hall. Masahiro Chono said on April 13th that he finished up his physical therapy, and from this point forward fans will see the real Chono in the ring. He's been very limited and careful in the ring since his return from chronic neck problems that were at one point thought to be potentially career-ending. Chono also said that he wants to bring Don Frye into the NWO, and may try and get Hiroyoshi Tenzan, his longtime tag team partner, back from Keiji Muto's Wolfpack-like group. New Japan is also talking about running another Tokyo Dome show in October, if things can be worked out for a Shinya Hashimoto vs Naoya Ogawa match. There are political problems in that match taking place if Ogawa holds the NWA title, unless New Japan breaks off its contract with WCW, because apparently as everything went down, New Japan is specifically not allowed to book the NWA champion as long as it's affiliated with WCW. Right now there are no business relations between New Japan and UFO, and Inoki has been pretty negative as to how New Japan has been Americanizing its storylines. They opened the new tour on April 13th in Sendai at Miyagi Sports Center before 4,300 with Tenryu and Fujinami over Kojima and Tenzan in the main event. The only foreigners on the tour are Brian Johnston, Shocker, and Michael Wallstreet, while Liger and Great Sasuke worked as a tag team and Gran Hamada also worked the undercard. March 20th TV show did a 3.3 rating, and March 27th TV show did a 3.2 rating. Other Japan notes. Michinoku Pro is running a big show on April 27th at Tokyo Oda War Gymnasium with Great Sasuke vs Jinsei Shinzaki as the main event, plus there will be an interpromotional match with Satoru Asako and Masamichi Marufuji of All Japan teaming with Naohiro Hoshikawa against Grand Naniwa and Tiger Mask and Yoshinobu Kanemaru. All Japan along with Arai and Kanda from Toriuman in a tag match against Riki Fuji. FMW Magnum Tokyo Toriuman Shadow WX retained the Big Japan Death Match title, beating Abdullah the Butcher on April 7th at Korakuen Hall when Butcher was tied with a chain around his neck to the corner and basically beaten to death until the referee stopped the match. Minoru Fujita, who formed a pretty decent rock and roll express style undercard tag team with Ikuto Hidaka in several of the indie groups, appears to have retired. On the final show of the IWA 5th year anniversary tour on April 13th at Korakuen Hall, Ghostface, Tarzan Goto, won the IWA heavyweight title from Doug Gilbert. Terry Funk was also on tour this week for IWA and on that show teamed with Yoshia Yamashita and Keisuke Yamada to beat Mr. Pogo and Shoji Nakamaki and Grand Sheik. Arias Romero JWP ran a big show on April 10th in Sapporo with Azumi Hyuga Tomoko Kuzumi, retaining the JWP title beating Carlos Amano in the main event. Neo Ladies looks like it's going to have 2 more feuds with AJW. Both groups ran Tokyo on April 11th. AJW show was at Korakuen Hall which drew its usual crowd of close to 1,500 with the masked Saps unmasking before the match and working as faces Tomoko Watanabe and Kaoru Ito beating Atsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda in the main event when Ito pinned Shimoda with the double foot stomp in 30:09. There will be more matches upcoming between the two teams. The Neo Ladies show at the small Arlon Hall saw Takako Inoue show up at ringside watching Kyoko Inoue's singles main event against Saya Endo. So those two will apparently wrestle in a singles match on May 5th in Kawasaki. There has been a ton of mainstream media publicity about Atsushi Onita going to night school to get his high school diploma. It's as if it's only a publicity stunt because it's been so publicized. Onita's first day of school was April 12th and his mother attended class with him. With Tarzan Goto negotiations falling through, the main event of FMW's big show on May 5th at Yokohama Bunka Gym will be Hiromichi Fuyuki defending his title against whoever scores the pinfall in a tag match with Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki vs Masato Tanaka and Tetsuhiro Kuroda that will be held earlier on the card. Also on the show will be an FMW vs Battle Arts match with Mr. Ganasuke and Hisakatsu Oya and Yukihiro Kanemura and Hideki Hasaka and Haido against 5 wrestlers from Battle Arts, Koji Nakagawa vs Tsuyoshi Kikuchi of All Japan, and Minoru Tanaka defending the independent junior title against either Riki Fuji or Masao Orihara, who have a singles match on April 20th to get the shot. Takeshi Morishima of All Japan also appears on the show. Naoya Ogawa is going to tour the US as NWA champion during May. There at one point was a plan for Ogawa to work the May 22nd show for Rings at Ariake Coliseum, with them doing the gimmick of Linus Asuka as president of GIA from winning the match on April 4th. On the first big show on April 25th at Korakuen Hall, Chikusan Nagaya will have to work in the opening match. Here and there. It appears that Torberg's WNWA will be running women's pay-per-view dates on June 20th and August 29th. Sort of pulling the cart before the horse. The first show is tentatively titled Dangerous Curves, although they will use traditional women wrestlers on the show. There is also a lot of talk about TNN carrying pro wrestling starting in August on Friday nights in prime time, either in the current Roller Jam time slot. TNN PR is claiming that Roller Jam has been renewed for a second season, and we've also heard that they've scheduled the first set of tapings for the second season in June at Universal Studios. Speaking of Roller Jam, it was the subject of a photo feature in last week's Sports Illustrated for some apparent reason that was never made clear, as there were a bunch of photos of the women in action at the front of the magazine with only a cut line-like story talking about roller derby starting in 1935, or as part of a 2-hour block. It appears that a new promotion which is paying anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000 per week depending upon which source ones choose to believe. We've heard that TNN is trying to get $1 million up front from the group to cover the payment on either 7 or 20 shows for the air time. It's not Paul Alperstein, who did the short-lived American Wrestling Federation, which was a huge money loser a few years back, but the group is run by a lot of people who were with Alperstein's group and are planning on filming a pilot show in Florida. TNN had talked with both ECW and NWA about the slot. ECW had a meeting scheduled for early this week with TNN, so the fact there was a meeting says that they must still be in contention, either to pick up if this deal falls through, or perhaps TNN would want to go with a product with an established following as opposed to building a company from scratch, which would be a highly difficult position with so few marketable players not under contract, and those that have no contracts like Sid and Hellwig being the types that would do more harm than good in the long run. NWA was in contention probably until the past week. They had proposed doing a show different from Raw or Nitro, more like traditional wrestling, but TNN decided that the wrestling people want today is the product on Raw. In Power Pro, Derek King turned on Brandon Baxter in a match on April 3rd in Jonesboro, Arkansas, which the promotion was at stake, so Randy Hales is back in charge. They had a cake for a party celebrating Hales in control, which ended up with Baldo putting both Hales and Downtown Bruno's face in the cake. Some notes from watching tapes of this group. You have no idea how silly it looked to see mid-40s Stan Lane and Steve Kieran doing the Fabulous Ones gimmick, strutting around acting like they are the gigolos they were 15 years ago when they were the big stars. When they came out on TV to Billy Squires' Everybody Wants You, there was no crowd pop, which made it even sadder. Since I vividly remember the period where they became the prototype team that everyone copied, although the Rock and Roll Express and later the Rockers became bigger stars on a national basis, none were ever as important within their promotion as the Fabs. It looked even sillier, particularly since they played their early 80s music videos to lead to their return. The other thing hilarious is that announcer Dave Brown hasn't aged a day in the same period, so when Dave is out there screaming about welcoming Stan and Steve, looking and sounding exactly like he did in 1983, and then to see Stan and Steve's parents come out playing dirty old men with Stacy, oh well, time marches on. Steve Bradley is a very good wrestler who tries to look like Rob Van Dam too much, to the point even though he can wrestle, he looks like an imitation. Kurt Angle needs a lot of work developing an interview style because the one he's got reminds me of a 70s Bob Backlund, which won't play today. Vic Grimes has noticeably dropped a lot of weight. In the Lawler and Dundee vs. Fabs rematch on April 3rd in Jonesboro, Arkansas, Dundee pinned Kieran for the finish. Kid Wicket and Derek King apparently regained the PPW tag titles on that show from Aaron O'Grady and Vic Grimes, but Wicket and King are no longer teaming together. Wicket came out by himself to defend against O'Grady and Bulldog Reigns, and to make O'Grady and Reigns look that much worse, in a handicap match, they lost to the barely 5-foot-tall Wicket. Ivan Koloff, who it is believed is 62, came out of retirement this weekend to work some Carolina shows as a Russian tag team with Nikolai Volkov, who himself is 51. Speaking of wrestling stars from that era, Don Morocco is running a show using a lot of 80s talent in Hawaii this coming weekend. The Canadian Comedy Channel is doing a documentary on the life of Mad Dog Vachon, which airs on May 19th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, called Wrestling with the Past, which will feature interviews of many of the biggest stars of the 60s. Tony Atlas, who is the booker and top star for the Eastern Wrestling Alliance out of Lewiston, Maine, was fired. No details, but it was enough to force cancellation of a show this coming weekend. Apocalypse Wrestling will be headlined by Missy Hyatt vs. Kimona plus Jimmy Snuka and Tony Atlas on May 2nd in St. Catharines, Ontario. Across the border from Niagara Falls, Jesse Ventura appointed former wrestling and current Roller Jam announcer Ken Resnick to the Minnesota Amateur Sports Commission. Resnick had been working with the commission since 1996. An update on the Brian Pillman Memorial Show on May 19th at the Cincinnati Gardens. There will be both WWF and WCW matches, although not against one another. WWF will send Mankind vs. D'Lo Brown, Tom Pritchard vs. Terry Taylor, and Road Dogg vs. Al Snow, plus Jim Ross will be coming in to help with the broadcasting of the show. WCW matches aren't finalized as of yet, but Chris Benoit, Chris Jericho, Rey Mysterio Jr., and Dean Malenko are scheduled. May 8th at Iona College in New Rochelle, New York has Yokozuna, Scorpio, Gilbert, Tom Brandy, Marty Jannetty, John Cronus, Hardy Boys, and Honky Tonk Man. Anyone who brings an observer to the event can get $1 off any bleacher set ticket. For more info, call 914-235-4676. KTEL is putting out a World of Wrestling Rocks album featuring entrance music remakes of WWF Austin, Undertaker, Kane, Outlaws, etc. opens. The AP actually did a story last week of Jeff Costa, Lobsterman, a New Hampshire indie wrestler running for president. MTV is working on a documentary on 24-year-old Matt Talia of Chicago attempting to break into pro wrestling and film scenes of his being trained by Leigh Thatcher as Cincinnati Jim. Latest AWA-based comedy. They sent a brochure out to amusement park directors trying to sell shows, which included a quote from a Jackson, Mississippi article saying, other than Garth Brooks concerts, this was probably as quick a sellout we've ever had. Of course, that article was written about a WCW show, but the press release said it was written about an AWA live event. It claimed recent live events have grossed over $5.8 million each, while New Japan has at the Tokyo Dome. The press release went on to say that AWA delivers the major stars seen every week on Raw and Nitro through an agreement with WWF and WCW. They also plugged autograph sessions with stars of AWA, WWF, and WCW. Jerry Bragg of American Pro Wrestling at P.O. Box 40, Spartanburg, South Carolina 29305 and 864-578-0365 is looking for workers in the area to send resumes. How's this for an angle? Maryland Championship Wrestling is doing an angle where on the past several shows, Stevie Richards has been running down Shane Shamrock, Brian Hauser, who died months back after being shot by police in breaking up a domestic dispute. They've done arguments where Richards and Hauser's mother almost go at it. On the April 8th show, she hit the ring to protect Earl the Pearl, who Richards had just laid out, and Richards kneed and punched her out as well. MMA. The UFC pay-per-view lineup on May 7th from Birmingham, Alabama now looks to be Boss Rutan vs. Kevin Randleman to crown the heavyweight champion, Pete Williams vs. Travis Fulton, Pedro Rizzo vs. Trey Telligman, Wanderlei Silva vs. Tony Patara, Laverne Clark vs. Fabiano Iha, and Sean McCulley vs. Chris Brennan. If it sounds weak, it's because it is. It's pretty clear the budget has been cut way back and they are just trying to sell it on the UFC name until a breakthrough comes. The show planned for June 18th has been moved to July 16th, supposedly because UFC didn't want to run a pay-per-view one day before the Larry Holmes vs. Bonecrusher Smith boxing match. As if they run the same weekend as pro wrestling pay-per-view shows that will do triple what the Holmes fight will. The July 16th main event at this point will be Maurice Smith vs. Marco Ruas. Vitor Belfort had arthroscopic knee surgery on April 7th, but his doctor said that it shouldn't affect his being able to fight on April 29th against Kazushi Sakuraba. Of course, we've heard the same thing about Belfort on at least 3 occasions, and at all 3 times he hasn't fought. Of the new guys on the UFC show, Fulton actually has more experience in real MMA fights than any man alive, as he's done something like 65 fights over the past few years and seems to fight every other weekend. He's won most of his fights, but has never beaten anyone with a major name. Rizzo Telligman could actually be an interesting fight. Not only do I know nothing about Patara other than he's fought on some small shows, but nobody else seems to. Clark is a boxer/wrestler from the Pat Militic stable and has done dark matches on 2 pay-per-view shows and is an exciting fighter. I've seen Iha fight, and he's good with submissions, which is where Clark is weak, but he can be hit, which Clark can do. McCulley was doing pro wrestling on the last UFO show, and has an 0-3 record in MMA, while Brennan fought in the first UFC lightweight tournament and lost in the finals to Militic after winning an alternates match earlier. USWF lightweight champion Eric Payne lost on April 9th Shudo show at Tokyo Kitazawa Town Hall, losing in the main event to Naoya Uematsu in 15 seconds with a heel hook. TSN is working on a documentary on the UFC. There is a series of meetings scheduled the weekend of June 4th to June 6th in Kansas City for the U.S. Committee for the Sport of Pancration, which debuts in the 2004 Olympics. ECW. There continues to be more talk about financial problems within the company, with more checks bouncing over the past week or two. Rumors are springing up everywhere about the future of the company once again. What at best appears to be happening is that Paul Heyman is attempting to put together some sort of a deal that would keep things going. Besides talks with Nashville Network, there are numerous other negotiations going on both with video game companies and with the WWF in regards to WWF taking over licensing of the company. Heyman had originally said he didn't want to make that move because WWF would then have too much power of the company's financial condition, but there were meetings scheduled this week. The only show of the week was April 10th in Dayton, Ohio, which drew 1,794, paying about $50,000. Takamichi Noku and Mosco Delamer said should be back at the Queen's TV taping in 2 weeks, and at least through the pay-per-view show on May 16th. The first show in Chicago is scheduled for June 17th at the Odeum Theater, which is actually in Villa Park. WWF is pressuring ECW to hire Steve Regal. Since Regal lost his job with WWF, he's in danger of deportation. Paul Heyman said the deal with Scorpio was only a one-time thing and that he didn't think Scorpio looked that impressive in the match with Rob Van Dam. Some notes from the weekend television show, which was taped at the April 3rd ECW Arena show. In the Tommy Dreamer angle with Lance Storm, Dreamer actually poured the so-called urine sample on Storm's face and not on the new Beulah. Storm came out with a Chris Jericho t-shirt and the fans were chanting Jericho at him. The two used to be a tag team in Canada and for Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Van Dam vs. Scorpio was heavily edited, largely just based upon the current Sabu angle where Fonzie has him benched and doesn't want him in action, but he does run-ins anyway because the guys backstage can't contain him. What aired of the match appeared to have the guys on different pages. Scorpio was used to the larger WWF ring, so his timing was really off early, and they didn't show much except the early stuff and the finish. The other match that aired was the Taz vs. Chris Candido match. Candido, when he delivered the line about not tapping out to Nubane and Somas, was clearly reading someone else's script and not doing his own promo, if you get my drift. He was clearly not wanting to say it as he said it, but his emphasis tried to bury it. Candido worked really hard, taking a lot of great bumps, and carried it to a good match. It's the best he's looked on television in quite a while. He was only slightly smaller and almost as cut as when he left. Tammy looked worn out, like what she is, a very pretty woman who is looking hard because she doesn't appear to have slept much of late. ECW is expected to start on WSBK in Boston according to what Heyman told the wrestlers over the weekend, which may be the best clearance the company has ever gotten, in early May. There have also been internet reports that this announcement may have been premature since the station is denying there is a deal. Sid is still all over the pay-per-view commercials. Tickets for the May 16th pay-per-view show in Poughkeepsie range from $40 to $150. The new company slogan is "It's not kid stuff." WCW. The only matches known for the May 9th Slamboree pay-per-view show from the TWA Dome in St. Louis are Page vs. Nash for the WCW title, a three-way for the tag titles with Kidman and Mysterio Jr. vs. Raven and Saturn vs. Benoit and Malenko. Most likely Raven and Saturn will come out with the belts and do the free bird gimmick with Kanyon when he returns, as the movie has just finished filming. The other match announced is Gorgeous George vs. Charles Robinson, which should sell a ton of tickets since George has had so much time thus far to get over. Speaking of Savage, his return has been really funny. He's huge, he's desperately trying to look young, which is important since this is a youth-oriented business. He's got the girl, which as you can see is so important in today's ratings, and in his first interview he was stealing everyone's catchphrases like cock of the walk, Flair 80s, lay the smackdown. I mean, I'd be embarrassed to even say that on television, and showstopper, Michaels. As of the first weekend of sales, the show has an advance of 7,979 tickets for $313,172, which sounds good, but is way behind where it was for Nitro in December, and it appears now there's no way it can come close to the original goal of selling more than 30,000 tickets to the show in the Big Dome. Scott Hall returns on the April 19th Nitro in Gainesville, Florida. Nitro on April 12th drew a sellout 7,345, 6,279 paying $159,629.50 to the Yakima Sun Dome. The show opened with a surprise, a lengthy Sting interview. Sting got less over the more he spoke, to the point there were actually some boos by the end. He wound up challenging Page for a title shot. Sting claimed he was the guy who built the house and seemed mad at people like Rhodes and Hogan who had claimed differently, being he was the only one who had been there since the company was formed. Hey, you should be mad at Rhodes, but he's not even in Hogan's league when it comes to building this company. In a cruiser title match, Mysterio Jr. vs. Juventud Guerrera had no ending in 5:43 of a very good match when Benoit and Malenko beat up both guys. Raven and Saturn ended up saving Mysterio Jr., but Mysterio Jr. shoved Saturn and they beat him up as well. Kidman never came out to save him. Later in the show, Mysterio Jr. asked Kidman why he didn't help him, and Kidman said he had just arrived because WCW had him doing an autograph session. It was kind of funny. But then Shivani, not paying attention, said that Kidman was there and they didn't know why he didn't come out. Hawk hit Hugh Morris in the head with a cane and he laughed. Morris then destroyed somebody backstage with a cane. They did an about face on the Bret Hart angle. The original plan was to treat it as a shoot and not mention it, but after a lot of prodding, I guess people realized that it would be dead within 2 weeks without a TV push. They even showed clips from his appearing on later which actually portrayed him as a babyface. Bigelow pinned Hugh Morris with a diving headbutt in 4:56 in a kendo stick match. Shivani talked about maybe creating a hardcore or extreme title belt. The match wasn't that good, but the crowd was really into it because of the broken table spots. Page came out and was booed heavily. He's Ronnie Garvin all over again. He said Sting deserved a shot but wouldn't get it because he's after Steiner. He tried to come off as a face, but nobody was that concerned that the fans turned on him because eventually he's supposed to be a heel anyway. Flair did an interview and said the title was held up. Savage and George came out. Savage said he was the ref and Page won the match. Flair said Savage had some explaining to do. Savage never did explain why he turned on Flair as ref. Somehow this wound up with a Charles Robinson vs. George match after George slapped Charles. Sting came out and challenged Flair to a match, and Anderson accepted for Flair but said he'd be in Flair's corner. La Parka and Dandy went to a no decision with the Master Blasters. For the 5 people who cared, Kevin Nash's first pro match was on September 5, 1990 in Asheville, South Carolina on a Clash of the Champions as part of a tag team called the Master Blasters. His partner, who was awful, was so embarrassed by his performance that he went home and was never seen again. These Blasters were 2 huge muscle guys, one a friend of Raven's and the other a friend of Goldberg's, who I believe played pro football a few years back. Of course they were green. Nash beat all four up at once, including delivering 3 power bombs, and did a promo saying he had a shot at Page at the pay-per-view. For a guy who has a rep for doing good promos, Nash is the worst promo guy around. He got more cheers than boos talking about Page. Kidman beat Psychosis in 7:37 with a shooting star press in a real good match. Goldberg did an interview challenging Hart, Luger, and Page. He was losing the crowd as the interview went on. Booker T pinned Rick Steiner to keep the TV title when Stevie Ray interfered and hit Rick with the slapjack in 5:21. Terrible match. This also featured the single worst ref bump in history. Rick never came near the ref, who I guess fainted from the embarrassment of having to go down on a bump that missed. Goldberg beat Kenny Chaos in 4:23 with the spear and jackhammer. Goldberg sold more than usual. This Ricky Rackman and the DJ stuff is a huge mistake. Male fans won't mind scantily clad women dancing between matches, but they'll switch the station at the first sight of annoying DJ types. Sting beat Flair with a Scorpion Death Drop in 14:22. It's nothing we haven't seen 500 times before, but it built to real good crowd heat. It was the best Sting match since the last time he held the belt. Savage came down and decked Anderson when he was helping Flair. Sting put Anderson in the Scorpion afterwards. Main event saw Page pin Scott Steiner to keep the title in 13:37. Slightly below average match. Piper was at ringside doing commentary. He was out there way too long. Kimberly was at ringside. Her plastic surgery worked because she looked several years younger. She clocked Scott with a chair to lead to the diamond cutter. That's always scary when a non-worker has to do something physical for the finish, but it was a good chair shot. Ted DiBiase was backstage in Las Vegas and helped out doing the Backstage Blast show when Rick Rude no-showed. But he was telling everyone that he wasn't coming back to wrestling. DiBiase, who is heavily religious as a shoot, as opposed to many wrestlers who are heavily religious as a work, isn't happy with the current direction of the product. Also backstage in Vegas was Sir Oliver Humperdinck. Reports on the WCW hotline that Dennis Rodman was there aren't true, however. Surge is now a sponsor of Nitro, and whenever they go to talking head shots, Shivani has one on the table. Even Nash came out drinking one for his interview. This is going to get annoying. The Thunder show that aired on April 7th only did a 2.0 rating, which is a record low for the show. Some of that can be blamed on it being on Wednesday, but last year during baseball season it was often moved to Wednesday and was drawing 2.9 to 3.4 ratings in the same slot. Another alarming sign was that the April 10th WCW Saturday Night show only did a 1.7 rating, which was its lowest rating in years. It's going to be interesting to see how WCW responds to these poor numbers over the next 2 weeks. Will they put on stronger matches and have bigger stars attend the tapings or not? Thunder is pretty much sold to advertisers on the basis of a 3.5 rating, so no matter how bad the show was, as long as it maintained that number, nobody was going to be overly concerned. It's time to be concerned. The show has been so bad I almost think it's being booked to die on purpose so everyone gets one more day off work. On the Thunder show, the T vs. Chris Jericho match that was originally to be an elimination match for the US title tourney, they ended up doing that match the previous Monday, wound up as voice-overed as simply a TV title match. Jericho sprained his ankle at the April 5th Vegas match in that real clumsy finish, which is why he's out for about 2 weeks, and not because of any other reason. The betting line these days is that he's leaning toward WWF when his contract expires in late July, but no deal has been made either way. Wrestlers hate the new ramp. It's going to be a killer on run-ins because there is no footing, so the intensity live is blown when guys have to walk carefully down the ramp before doing the run-in. Goldberg already stumbled this past Monday on his entrance. To show either how clueless Bischoff is, or something, in an employees meeting the week before the Vegas show where Bischoff told everyone he was staying for at least another 3 years, he said that the Vegas show, because of the new set, graphics, open and music, would do a 7.0 rating. Like that's what people watch Monday Night Wrestling for. Goldberg donated $100,000 to the University of Georgia for a football scholarship in his name. There was a big ceremony at the school for him last week, including him attending spring football practice and throwing out the first pitch at a college baseball game. Ric Flair threw out the first pitch at a St. Louis Cardinals baseball game last week. The wrestler who took the good bumps on the later segment with Bret Hart that they simply called Angel was Christopher Daniels. The name Big Sexy was actually a name created by Canadian wrestler Luther Biggs, who did several tryout matches with WCW under that name. The belief is that Terry Taylor watched Biggs wrestle, liked the name, and gave it to Kevin Nash. Ideas for new slogans for WCW, which is to unveil a new advertising campaign designed to differentiate itself from WWF, are either Shut Up and Wrestle, or it's out there. How about Dumb and Dumber? Bagwell and Raven were in Toronto this past week working on the Ventura movie. Ron Race was also in the movie playing the role of Big John Studd. Canyon filmed a ladder match with a Toronto indie wrestler named L'Artiste over the weekend. Barry Darsow and Bobby Walker were also in. Nils Allen Stewart, who stars in the movie as Jesse, pulled his groin on April 6, so an area independent wrestler named Mark Hamilton has been filming the wrestling sequences as Ventura. Hamilton wrestles as doing a German gimmick for promoter Waldo von Erich, remember him, out of Cambridge, Ontario. Canyon has been pretty vocal about wrestling getting shortchanged in the movie, as he hasn't been able to get across to people that without pro wrestling, there would be no Jesse Ventura, as opposed to him being this governor who just so happened to have a weird job before becoming governor. Apparently Master Fuji isn't the only character based on the likeness of a wrestler in the WCW vs. NWO World Tour game. Most of the non-wrestling characters are said to be based on Japanese wrestlers such as Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki, and that the Master Fuji character is very close to Mr. Fuji. A Flair vs. Goldberg dark match has been added to the April 29th Thunder tapings in State College, Pennsylvania because the advance is weak. They are going to start adding dark match main events to keep the audience staying through the second taping and help draw a house at Thunder tapings, which are starting to fall off at the gate. There were no house shows this week aside from the pay-per-view and Nitro. There is probably no coincidence that the pay-per-view show was that good and there had been no house shows for 6 days, as everyone was rested and ready to go that extra step. Merchandise sales from April 1st to April 12th, not including the pay-per-view, were $253,676 or $6.34 per head. Hard On later drew a 2.0 rating, which I imagine is very good for that time slot. Tonight Show with Hogan drew a 5.7 rating, which is exceedingly good for that time slot. WWF. The latest updated estimates on WrestleMania indicate closer to 850,000 to 875,000 buys, which would be a 2.28 to 2.35 buy rate, or roughly exactly the same or a very slight increase in the buy rate from last year. The total buys was more than 100,000 over the previous high water mark for a wrestling pay-per-view show. For the April 25th Backlash show, the only changes to what was previously announced was Mankind vs. Paul White will be a boiler room match, which means it'll probably be a pre-taped feature, and that Owen Hart and Jeff Jarrett face the New Age Outlaws. Even though it can be edited ahead of time, the idea of White in a boiler room match doesn't sound thrilling, even if Mankind can put on a one-man show. One of the things about the Mankind vs. Rock pay-per-view matches were that whenever you knew someone was going to take a nasty bump, you always knew ahead of time that Mankind would do it but Rock wouldn't. You know White isn't going to do any nasty stunts, so it's another one-man show. The Raw taping on April 12th drew a sellout 14,701, paying $307,766 to the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit. Jim Ross was back on commentary. It in some ways takes a lot of guts to put Ross out there because he isn't fully healed, but in listening to him do a complete show after all these months, he's so ridiculously ahead of every other announcer when it comes to getting angles and storylines over. It became obvious in the first 30 minutes. It is also an amazing about-face, because it was just 2 weeks ago when they were having him do that gimmick of the freak that has gone postal, which says something for his own ability at political maneuvering, digging his announcing career out of the direction it was going. The show opened with a great segment where Shane McMahon took over the corporation and replaced Patterson and Briscoe as the dated flunkies with Pete Gas and Rodney as the more modern flunkies. He ended up slapping Vince in the face, who wouldn't hit him back because Stephanie told him not to. Vince left the building. Shamrock quit Shane's group over them letting the Ministry kidnap him last week. They never explained where they took him and how he got away, and sided with Vince, which started a very bad evening for him. There was supposed to be a Four Corners match for the WWLC Women with Little Clothing title. Nicole Bass, who didn't qualify for the last 3 words and probably doesn't qualify at least internally for the first one either, destroyed Tori, Jacqueline and Ivory before the match, so we had no match. Those women sure looked like pussies running away from her. The lights went out and Undertaker said there would be another pretty victim before the night was over. They built the show around a confrontation on a bridge between Austin and Rock. White pinned Christian in 110 with a choke slam. It was supposed to be White against 3 members of the Brood, but Undertaker told Christian for spilling the beans a few weeks back he'd have to wrestle White by himself. Billy Gunn no contest Val Venus in 342 when Jarrett, Hart, Deborah and Road Dogg all showed up for a party. Deborah had the hots for Venus. Jarrett wasn't happy about this. Mankind beat up Pete Gas and Rodney. It just reminded me of how fortunate we are that most of the wrestlers we see on television actually trained to be wrestlers, or everything would be this bad. Mankind was funny, saying how much he hated Rodney's haircut while beating him up. Hart and Jarrett beat Acolytes in 125 by DQ when the rest of the Ministry interfered. The Ministry held Hart and Jarrett, and Undertaker was about to do something unmentionable to Deborah. Deborah is the worst actress in wrestling, and think of how much ground that covers, since she couldn't stop laughing while she was supposed to play like she was frightened to death. Shamrock showed up with a baseball bat and beat up everyone but Taker, who then told Shamrock his sister, who I guess was held hostage for the entire week, was in the boiler room and pretty well insinuated that she'd been doing viscera, which was a pretty scary thought. So Ken was off to the boiler room. But it was another trap. Godfather won the IC title from Goldust with the world's sloppiest Death Valley driver in 355. This move used to be called the pimp drop. Maybe it still is. It was supposed to be Goldust versus Bossman, but Godfather offered him some hoes to take a hike. Bossman wanted 5 of them. Godfather made the deal. It was pretty bad, because Bossman's night ended in less than 3:55 because the hoes celebrated after the match with Godfather. The match was some kind of horrible. Fans didn't care since they were chanting Nitro sucks. Hey, it does a lot of the time, but unless you're talking black and white battle royal, it rarely sucked as bad as what was going on right before their eyes on Raw. Ken showed up in the boiler room, but it was a trap. The Ministry destroyed Shamrock and Mankind both, and Paul Bearer put Shamrock out with ether on a towel. Luckily Shamrock woke up in time to do his next 3 angles to get beaten up some more. Bob Holly beat D'Lo Brown in a hardcore title match when Al Snow saved Holly from a frog splash through a table, and Brown went through the table in 4:36. Snow was trying to build a work-shoot program with Mankind on commentary and talking about his title match. Holly worked a spot with 2 members of the Red Wings when he went to use a hockey stick. Snow handed Holly a glass of some liquid and he introduced it to Brown's skull. I can see teenagers all over the country sending 2020 audition tapes in Tuesday's mail. Shamrock got beat up again. Mankind saved him from almost certain crucifixion or sacrifice or some pagan ritual. Shamrock got away when the Ministry was distracted, since the Brood decided to quit and attack the non-charismatic members of the team. X-Pac and Kane beat Triple H and Test in 6:25 when Triple H and Chyna walked out on Test and Kane gave him a tombstone. At least X-Pac is great. Kane and Triple H, when they work together, wrestle like they're in a swimming pool, or at least running in slow motion like the kid in the Starburst commercial. Don't even get me started on Test. Imagine Juventud Guerrera and Ron Race as a team against Double A and Van Hammer. Shamrock came out and challenged Undertaker. Actually, he challenged Mark. You see, it's now established that this Undertaker character was a TV persona created by Vince McMahon and given to Mark Calloway. So everything up to this point that we've enjoyed and not enjoyed for the past 10 years was fake. But now he believes his own character, not unlike a scarily high percentage of current pro wrestlers, and believes he really is the Undertaker. So Shamrock was going to beat him up. Unfortunately, as long as they're on TV, he's got magical powers, so he just appeared behind Shamrock and started pounding him. Shamrock reversed it, and wouldn't you know, the Ministry beat him up again. If he ever had a night like this in UFC, they'd be calling him Fred Edish. It appeared Bossman and Triple H were going to save him once he was half dead, but then after they dragged him out of the ring, they all started pounding on him as well. He was saved by the bell, as they went to the river and Austin showed up. A stunt man flew off the bridge into the water, and Rock supposedly threw the skull title belt into the water as well. It was dumb enough when WCW did it with Giant in the same body of water years ago. The UPN 2-hour special called WWF SmackDown on April 29th will be taped on April 27th from the New Haven Coliseum. The Raw show that was to be taped on April 27th will instead be taped on May 2nd in San Diego, so San Diego will be both a live Heat show and a taped Raw show for the next night. WWF The Music was number 25 this past week with 62,727 buys. The number of buys was way up from last week, but it fell in the rankings because a whole lot of people bought a whole lot of records over Easter. Slam and Wrestling Hits, the one that is supposedly no longer on the market, was at number 160 and sold 10,215 units. Imagine how it would be doing if there wasn't a court order prohibiting it from being on the market. WCW is definitely going to be doing some sort of an entrance music CD in the upcoming months. Several wrestlers were given notice at the TV tapings on April 12th in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We don't have a complete list, but it includes Gilbert and Public Enemy. Blue Mumini didn't come out with Goldust on television the night before, but I don't know if that's significant or not. Super Astros has definitely fallen on the priority list. The show has been doing consistent 6.0 Hispanic ratings on Univision, which translates into about as many homes nationally as Shotgun and maybe 1/10 of what a 6.0 rating on Raw would actually translate into. As mentioned before, WWF has a contract with Univision through November. Super Astros has stopped plugging WWF pay-per-view shows. They only brought in a few wrestlers: Pantera, Papi Chulo, Takamichi Noku, Shuichi Funaki, Miguel Perez, Jesus El Merenguero Castillo, and Jose Estrada Jr. to the tapings from April 11th to the 13th. None of the other Mexican wrestlers were brought in. Armando Fernandez, who was originally looked at being the star of the division because he's a Latin lover-looking pretty boy type, didn't have his contract renewed. This isn't official, but good sources indicate that El Hijo del Santo won't be brought back either. Austin will be taping a second episode of Nash Bridges, which will air during the May sweeps. Sable is doing a second Playboy shoot after the success of the first one, that probably won't run until 2000. The May 23rd pay-per-view show, which will be held in Kansas City at Kemper Arena, is already sold out. Pancrase is claiming defamation of character and more ongoing legal action against Shamrock for his remarks on the Fight World Video magazine, saying that he was twice asked to lose matches by management in Pancrase, and that they have done worked matches. The live heat show on April 11th out of East Lansing, Michigan, which drew 8,405 paying $174,899, opened with them setting up a three-way with X-Pac and Kane, the Outlaws, and Hart and Jarrett for the tag titles. Shamrock beat Mideon with the ankle lock in 2:24. Shamrock wouldn't break the hold unless Mideon told him where his sister was. Mideon didn't tell him. Shamrock didn't break his ankle. But he did suplex ref Jimmy Corderas. Mankind had a birthday cake for Sacco. When he came out, he said it wasn't Mr. Sacco's birthday, but since East Lansing, Michigan was where he debuted the gimmick, it was a birthplace party. The crowd sang happy birthday. Mankind made a joke about Snow not selling chairs. The cake wound up in nobody's face. Talk about not adhering to the time-honored traditions that made this business great. Rock beat Brown in 3:20 with what he called the people's elbow, which probably is a hint of things to come. Bossman beat Draws via DQ when a fan came out of the stands in 41 seconds and Test made the save. The fan was Matt Bloom, who worked Memphis as Baldo. Just what WWF needs the most right now is another 6'6", 340-pound guy. The three-way wound up lasting 2 minutes with X-Pac pinning Gunn with the X Factor. Weekend ratings for April 10th to April 11th saw Livewire at 1.5, its lowest in a long time, Superstars at 1.7 and Heat at a strong 4.41 rating and 7.4 share. The only weekend house show was April 10th in Cincinnati, drawing a sellout 9,915 paying $198,420. For the weekend, the total merchandise was $277,461 or $8.40 per head. The April 7th Philadelphia Weekly ran an article ripping the local Philadelphia Daily News for doing the two-part series on pro wrestling before WrestleMania in the sports section. The basic argument was that pro wrestling wasn't a sport, which is a valid point. However, the article said that fewer than 400 guys are good enough athletes to play in the NBA, but any musclehead with a little theatrical skill and a large supply of steroids can be a star in the WWF. That's making it sound way too easy. The article didn't say the story shouldn't have run. In fact, it said it should have in the entertainment section, or even on the front page, because it wasn't a sports story but a story about how pop culture is changing. It said that by putting a wrestling story in the sports section, it was an example of the media willingly help blur the distinction between news and trash, which is certainly another arguable point. Jesse Ventura was interviewed by the Winnipeg Free Press on April 11th on subject of the current direction of wrestling and the news story in Manitoba about teachers being upset it airs in prime time due to the sexual content. By the way, the warning graphic that aired before Raw started last week didn't air this week. Responded by saying that he doesn't watch pro wrestling but that it never was wholesome entertainment and always promoted stereotypes. Every Japanese wrestler was a sneaky little guy who threw salt and every German wrestler was a Nazi. If you don't want children to see it, that's called parenting. He claimed that he had outgrown pro wrestling, but he also had no connection with it today because both companies banned him. He said he was banished by the WWF after beating them in the lawsuit, and he was banished by WCW because he and Hulk Hogan don't get along, and said he felt slighted when he was at a Nitro when running for governor last year, and WCW wouldn't acknowledge him on camera. I walked away that night and said I'd never go back again. And the best part of it is I won. And so now they're all sucking up to me. Austin's videotaped appearance on Howie Mandel will be on May 29th. Val Venus is on La Femme Nikita on April 25th. The readers' pages. Deaths. For a long time, we followers of pro wrestling have grown to accept the fact that many of its participants will die prematurely. This phenomenon is generally not found in other endeavors related to athletics, excluding events where the risk of death and serious injury is inherent, such as automobile racing and stunt work. But there is another business in which even more people have died young. Similar to wrestling in that it often features flamboyant, exciting spectacle, this industry has had more unnecessary deaths in history than any other field. It has been going on a lot longer than wrestling. A morbidly titled website called Dead Rock Stars contains a list of artists which spans most of the 20th century. Many parallels exist between popular music and pro wrestling, and not just the huge amount of tragic losses of young people that occur in both businesses. There are untold pressures. The sad reality is that it is difficult to imagine that either problem will ever really go away. Harley York, Bronxville, New York. Outside the lines. The ESPN piece, while better than most mainstream exposes, still deserves some scrutiny. Jim Ross' column raised, I believe, some pertinent points regarding ESPN's usual stand regarding wrestling, i.e. that it deserves our contempt. While the show did come off as balanced and for the most part accurate, I still don't consider ESPN a fair and impartial judge, especially when we consider their programming vies for the same demographics as wrestling. ESPN's contempt for wrestling was subtly illustrated when the show pointed out, with wide eyes, that many wrestlers are actually real athletes. Considering the size of the participants and the physical nature of the job they perform, why is this a surprise? It's not far removed for the is it fake? Question on the relevance scale. Again, the piece was perhaps the most accurate mainstream piece of date. Outside of the $1 billion figure and the gross oversimplification that Stunning Steve Austin flopped because he wasn't kick-ass enough, there weren't too many glaring errors. But there were a few, and the rash of media attention afforded wrestling has really hammered home to me that the mainstream media is probably inaccurate more often than we realize. I have enough background knowledge of wrestling to realize that ESPN, NBC Dateline and A&E just didn't do their homework. By extension, I realize more than ever that all reporting should be taken with a grain of salt. I was worried to see that you defended the mother who was worried that while she could monitor her children, she was worried about other children who were left to their own devices. That is the pat argument of those who favor censorship, which is what all the parents on the show were advocating. Also, I'd like to give a thumbs up to Chris Jericho for having the guts to say that the steroid issue should only be the concern of the people doing them. Matthew Wolfley. Dunkirk, New York. Response from Dave Meltzer. As someone who was spoken with by many different reporters who worked on that piece, their quest for accuracy was unmatched by any television show or group of mainstream reporters I've dealt with, and those by now number well into the hundreds, and the finished product showed that clearly. I can tell you they went in with no intentions of being a puff piece, nor of burying the business, and came out with a fair report on the business which has both its positives and negatives. The people within wrestling who have tried to bury this piece, particularly to the fans, are the same as the types who can't argue the merits and specifics of any issues, so instead try to turn attention away from the facts and create emotional arguments about motives of reporters. There's an old saying when you're in an argument that you argue the facts, unless you know you're wrong, and then you try and run down the motives of the other side. The WWF's response to not address and confront the different issues brought up but try and find some sort of hidden agenda was similar to Ventura blaming the newspaper rather than the college or the basketball program for the fact that the University of Minnesota had faculty advisors write papers for its basketball players to keep them eligible. I agree that the $1 billion figure shouldn't have been used, although if you add up all revenue generated in some form by the wrestling industry around the world you can get the figure up to $1 billion, but you can't get to that figure just from WWF and WCW. I also disagreed with the conclusion that Stunning Steve Austin was a flop to begin with. The Ringmaster was the only flop he was involved with, and whatever lack of success he had as Stunning Steve was for no other reason than WCW not giving him the chance to be a success. His current gimmick is a lot better than Stunning Steve, but it isn't as if anyone with half a brain didn't see he had potential to be a top star, maybe not to this level, but to a lot better level than WCW brought him to, many years before he became one. Those points are exceedingly minor in the big picture, particularly in a 60-minute show that broke a lot of new ground. I definitely agree that A&E didn't come close to doing its homework on its Andre special, which I liked, but there were factual inaccuracies that shouldn't have been there, and its history of wrestling, which was a joke. I thought the Dateline piece was very good, but it could have been better. The Outside the Lines people did their homework and then some to come out with so much new material that had never been reported elsewhere, considering there have been a million pieces on wrestling mainstream over the past 6 months. As far as the issue of censorship, nobody on the show came even close to once bringing up the word censorship. It's unfair to say anyone on that show advocated censorship. They simply brought up problems resulting from WWF television, and the arguments that it's adult programming written for adults simply don't hold water when so much of the audience is children and most of the advertising is not aimed at adults, and that the defenses used for it have a counter that doesn't take much thinking to come up with. Of course, you should take all reporting with a grain of salt, but the mainstream reporting on wrestling today in general, and there certainly are a lot of exceptions, when it comes to accuracy beats the hell out of the stuff in the 80s and early 90s when it really was terrible. WCW. I've seen better angles on local cable access wrestling shows than WCW. Their booking is positively insulting to everyone's intelligence. It's all a bad dream, like going back to 1995 in the WWF when the Clique was burying good workers like Bam Bam Bigelow. What the hell was WCW thinking giving Kevin Nash the book? Remember that quote by Bischoff about McMahon believing his own BS? I guess the shoe is on the other foot now. I think Nash has seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High a few too many times. It's time for him to grow up a little bit. Mark Bryan. Newport, Rhode Island. My daughter and her friend attended the WCW Nitro in Cincinnati last week. We had ringside seats. Before the show went on the air, the WCW security asked my daughter and her friend to be ring girls, and they said yes. They went backstage for more than 3 hours. They only had to come to the ring 7 times in 3 hours. 7 matches in 3 hours? After the matches, the girls said everyone in WCW treated them great. They had a lot of fun and can't wait for WCW to come back on June 4th. They said everyone went out of their way to be nice to them. The nicest of all was Mean Gene, who made them feel real special. Thank you, WCW. You may have made the other 13,000 fans miserable for 3 hours watching the worst television show you could ever watch, but you made a lifelong memory for 2 16-year-old girls who had a lot of fun. Now just work on pleasing the other 13,000 fans and you'll be fine. Ted Marianos. Cincinnati, Ohio. Response from Dave Meltzer. There's something about this letter that I found really funny, but I can't exactly put my finger on it. How much more foolish can WCW get? Eric Bischoff says he wants to do a more G-rated format, and then the following week we get an ECW-style hardcore match and Scott Steiner making more sexual innuendos in his interviews. All this does is make WCW look more foolish than they've already achieved in being. Tony Rumble's assessment of the NWA in his letter was very interesting. As someone who works in an indie group, I've been very outspoken in saying most indie groups are nothing but a joke. Rumble's letter reinforced my opinion. When Dennis Coralluzzo brought the NWA name and made new titles, the idea was for it to be the 3rd biggest group in the country. How can this happen when you have board members who only care about their own agendas and now about the organization as a whole? If Bill Behrens wanted to save money on the transfer of tapes, why didn't he just borrow someone's super VHS recorder and transfer the material? I know it would take a little brain power, but couldn't that have been done instead of making excuses? If one has a life beyond wrestling, why did they take a job on the board to start with? Why not let someone who is serious about what can be accomplished get on the board? Trying to be the number 3 promotion doesn't mean you kiss up to a bigger company. It means you pool talent throughout the company, promote the best shows that you can, and build from there. I can sympathize and see Rumble's point and wish him the best of luck in trying to do what's right. It's pretty sad when WWF can do ECW better than ECW. All ECW can do now is have Joey Styles act like a whining crybaby because somebody found a way of doing their product better than they can, and actually can make money doing it. It may be time for ECW to reinvent itself because everyone else is having more success with their formula than they are. Bill Walkowitz. Rochester, New Hampshire. Heenan. You should lighten up on Bobby Heenan a little. Some of us are old enough to get his dated references and find him amusing at times. The sometimes ill-fated attempts at humor provide desperately needed relief from the incessant hyping of NWO fodder or upcoming pay-per-view show promotion that turns me off rather than makes me want to order them. Bill Gilger. Shamokin, Pennsylvania. Nils Allen Stewart. I read your mention of Nils Allen Stewart, the actor playing Jesse Ventura, in the April 5th Observer. I thought I'd write to give you a little more information about him. Nils wrestled for Eddie Mansfield's International Wrestling Federation out of Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida from approximately 1990 to 1992. His gimmick was the Stomper, and he looked basically the same as he does now, with a bald head, Fu Manchu, and a small ponytail at the back of his head. He wasn't a particularly talented worker, but he had decent charisma and a great physique. He mostly worked as part of the stable of Nasty Ronnie Galletti, which included the Possessor, who was originally the Repo Man until a dispute with WWF over the name, and before that was known as Nasty Ned Brady, who you may remember was a pretty good worker. Nils had an extremely lame finisher, which I remember was much like Kevin Sullivan's double foot stomp. Ron Lemieux and I tried to get him to use the shiny Nomaki, but for some reason Mansfield didn't like submission holds. In the waning months of the IWF in 1992, Mansfield started calling Nils the Mongolian Stomper. Obviously Eddie wasn't beneath outright theft of existing gimmicks. Although Nils bore a resemblance to Archie Gouldy, he was substantially taller. To this day, there are IWF tapes and television episodes in distribution with small US distributors and European licensors, so I suppose if someone looked hard enough, he could find a tape of Nils wrestling somewhere. Nils always had a passion for acting while he was with the IWF. Although with other IWF talent, which included the Long Riders, now Billy and Bart Gunn, Thunder Cobra NWO Sting Jeff Farmer, he worked at Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights as some sort of demonic figure for the weeks preceding Halloween. His big break came when he was cast as a villain in 1992 to 1993 for Burt Reynolds' movie Cop and a Half, shot in Tampa. I remember at the time he lived in the Melbourne/Titusville area on Florida's East Coast, the home of Jim Duggan, and was married to a woman bodybuilder who went on to become part of the cast of the American Gladiators attraction in Orlando, where former IWF announcer and current WWF announcer Kevin Kelly worked as the MC after Cop and a Half. And the demise of the IWF, Nils got divorced and moved to Southern California to pursue acting full-time. I'm told he eventually married an old high school girlfriend. In recent years he's been in many national television commercials, including a Mountain Dew commercial with Jackie Chan and the recent guest spot on ER. I haven't talked to him in a few years, but I have fond memories of him and recall he was very funny and super nice. I think he's a great choice to have been cast as Jesse Ventura. Christopher Qualman, Maitland, Florida. Power Pro. I just wanted to write in and express how much I've enjoyed Memphis Power Pro Wrestling since its inception 1 year ago. I don't feel Randy Hales has received his dues, as it's not easy putting together a company in conjunction with WMC5, much less book, in my opinion, the most consistently entertaining weekly television show. This promotion pushes young guys like Brandon Baxter, Baldo, Derek King and Aaron O'Grady, who I think are the future of pro wrestling, and Sean Stasiak, who is the next Lex Luger in my book. Sean Isla, Francois. Leesburg, Florida. Response from Dave Meltzer. I wonder how Stasiak would feel about that compliment. Wrestler of the Century. In response to Steve Yohei's letter in the April 12 Observer, the onset of the 21st century has again raised the question over who is the wrestler of the century. In my opinion, that is a question that can't be answered. Wrestling today is totally different from what it was 5 or 10 years ago, though if you can't compare it to a decade ago, how can you compare Mitsuharu Misawa or Ric Flair to Frank Gotch or Joe Stecker? It's like comparing the Concorde to the plane flown by the Wright brothers. I would have no other individual in mind when naming the wrestler of the 80s Ric Flair. I'd vote for Misawa for the 90s due to a combination of being a consistent main eventer and for his physical all-Japan style. Bret Hart would get my vote for North America, but the one thing that goes against picking him is that he only had a handful of good matches in WCW. Comparing world title reigns could be a good yardstick, but I don't see how that could be the main criteria. If so, we'd have to include the likes of Hulk Hogan, as he's been WWF, WCW and IWGP champion. Hogan may be one of the biggest box office draws of the century, but he shouldn't be considered one of the best wrestlers. Ted Turner must be one dumb fool. Who in their right mind would allow a $200 million company like WCW to turn into such a laughingstock on an international basis? I'm sure Turner didn't become a billionaire without keeping some form of watchful eye on all areas of his business empire. What's he doing now? Taking a vacation? For me, the main difference between WCW and WWF is continuity. Nothing in WCW seems related to anything else in the promotion, and it shows up every week on Nitro. WWF seems to flow pretty smoothly. The storylines follow order and logic and everything seems to be in the right place. Now that I fully agree with the road being taken by the WWF to surpass WCW because I want to watch wrestling for just that, not stupid storylines or the hint of seeing female nudity. Stuart Ketchian. Cannock, England. Response from Dave Meltzer. Turner has virtually nothing to do with pro wrestling. It's just a nice name for the media to use in a story to give it some name appeal because everyone has heard of Turner as one of the most successful businessmen in the country. He was part of the decision-making process to keep the company alive when Crockett was going to have to fold it more than 10 years ago. He made the key decision to keep it alive about 7 years ago when the higher-ups of TBS wanted to fold it as a big money loser. He made the call when Bischoff approached him to do Nitro and his name was at the bottom of the checks. While all those are key decisions in the history of wrestling, Turner never spent any serious time thinking of worrying about pro wrestling when it was a loser other than he believed based on cyclical patterns it would turn around, and it did. He's not going to worry much about it now when it's a winner. For better or worse, under Bischoff, this has gone from a $30 million a year company to a $200 million a year company, and while the company is headed for a major fall and a lot of Bischoff's success was being lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time and having a few ideas ahead of the curve and little in the way of follow-up when they ran their course. Outside of the people in the wrestling industry, nobody knows where the bad decisions and bad product that have led to the current fall have been brewing for more than a year and probably just blame it on falling behind WWF because of the easy excuse of not being allowed to be as risque, which gives everyone an easy out for their decline. Sunday Night Heat. Since its inception, I've thought Sunday Night Heat was a great idea. I've enjoyed the show and feel that it consistently sets the tone for the following night. Has there been any correlation between Raw's ascent in the ratings and the airing of Sunday Night Heat? It seems to me that Raw began this rise right about the time Heat started. Am I wrong? Steve Shaughnessy. Palo Alto, California. Response from Dave Meltzer. Raw has shown a consistent ratings rise dating back to about October 1997, which correlates with the ascent of Austin and DX, the Tyson rub and milking the Hart MC Mahan deal with the creation of McMahon as the heel owner. Raw's audience has continually grown, and since August, when Heat began, the growth has continued. I think Heat has helped the growth of Raw's audience, but it's not the primary factor and at best only a minor factor in Raw beating Nitro. Heat has also helped the growth of the pay-per-view audience, since it's a built-in 1-hour commercial for the shows right before they start. The lone negative is that Heat has hurt the quality of the pay-per-view shows because more often than not, 4 hours is too long for the live audience and the heat on WWF pay-per-view shows has been disappointing and combined with a lack of depth when it comes to in-ring talent, causes the shows to drag. Video wall. I was wondering what your opinion was on the large video walls that are present at all TV tapings. While I realize that it is a very small element, I can't help but wonder if these walls take away from the product in the ring. More specifically, I noticed that the majority of fans are more concerned with getting their signs and themselves on television rather than actually paying attention to the matches, hence the lack of heat for so many of the matches. I understand that nothing can make an Oddities vs. DOA match exciting, but I have felt for a long time that these walls serve little purpose other than to distract fans live from the in-ring product. It enhances the ring entrances for television purposes, but why keep them on during the matches? I noticed during a card in Hamilton last year that without the possibility of getting themselves over on a large video screen, fans paid a lot more attention to the wrestlers and the matches. Even a guy like Jeff Jarrett was able to get a lot of mileage out of the crowd. Ken Phillips. Binbrook, Ontario. Response from Dave Meltzer. That's an interesting observation. But I think video walls are here to stay for television tapings because technology nor time doesn't move backwards. Questions. Or will Sasso and Bubba Ray Dudley separated at birth? Shane McMahon as a champ. Is there something wrong with me? I don't get it. Seriously, what do you think about the future of All Japan and Toryumen? How does a guy with a few dozen matches like Blitzkrieg get a shot in WCW? I've enjoyed him, but I could think of 50 indie workers easy that deserve the chance. Sadly, as a musician, I probably already know the answer to this question. I heard that Blitzkrieg had his first match in 1994 and quit then to be an acrobat in Magic Mountain. I see Vince as a face moving ahead rapidly. He must have more respect from the boys for blading, taking wicked bumps and doing the job. The fans can't see him as a coward. What will be the thing to finally turn him face? Turning on Rock at WrestleMania? Could this be the time to invite Brett back to the WWF? Trent Vandress. Madison, Tennessee. Response from Dave Meltzer. Regarding All Japan and Toryumen, I think we'll all have a lot better idea in 6 months. Blitzkrieg got a spot for 2 reasons. 1, because he came highly recommended, and 2, because he impressed people at his tryout match. You'd have to be blind not to see his potential, and the fact that those at WCW saw it, pretty well proves that.